This story is set in Spokane, Washington, the second largest city in the state. As beautiful and attractive to tourists as the city may be on the outside, it can be just as dangerous to its residents. According to the state, Spokane County has the highest crime rate in Washington, twice the state average. So today's tale of young Cinderella has a beautiful exterior and a bitter flavor inside. The Holden family, a typical American family, had lived in Spokane for a long time. They adored children, so the house was always full of them. Judy and John Holden had 2 daughters and an adopted son, Joshua. The adult daughters had long since left the family and lived on their own. Their only son, Joshua, however, remained with his parents. Large, melancholic, and always frowning young man could not create his own family and therefore reluctantly stayed at his parents' house. The desire to have a stable income in the form of significant benefits forced the Holden family to take more than 1 and not 2 children from the orphanage. Thus, one day, a sweet little girl named Courtney appeared in the Holden family. Courtney Corinne Holden was born on February 28, 1992, and 2 years later found herself in an orphanage. Children of different ages dreamily prayed to the Almighty to give them a mom and dad. And one joyful day, the girl's wish came true. Little Courtney went to Spokane. Courtney began living with Joshua and several other foster children. When the door closed behind her, the girl's dreams of a caring and loving family remained only dreams. If in the orphanage Courtney's life seemed sad and joyless, at the Holdens it turned into a real nightmare. From a very young age, she was forced to do all sorts of chores around the house. She had to clean the whole house, wash the dishes for all the family members after every meal. What was especially surprising was that the Holdens treated the other foster children much better, and no one could understand the reason for their hatred of this sweet girl. Judy Holden had reached a respectable age by then, and Courtney was the last child they had taken from the orphanage. Perhaps that was the source of their inexplicable anger. Courtney was even forbidden to go outside without permission. People who visited their home often heard Judy and Joshua mistreat Courtney, calling her Cinderella, as if she were a fairy tale character who in real life was a slave to her stepmother and evil sisters. Courtney found herself in a similar role. However, the girl turned out to be very responsive and over the years of living with the Holdens got used to harsh conditions. She was afraid of her foster mother, and her brother Joshua inspired terror in her with his mere presence. He forbade her from socializing with her peers, and she had no cell phone or other modern conveniences. She never left the house without need or permission. She only got a breath of fresh air, like socializing with neighbors, when the house was empty by going out into the backyard. Courtney's upbringing took place in just such an environment. Over time, she grew up and just got used to her life. She didn't become embittered, always treating her foster parents with respect because she didn't know any other life and had no idea of a normal family. Courtney found some freedom when Joshua, due to irreconcilable differences with his parents, moved in with his sister for a significant amount of time. For Courtney, it was the happiest period of her life. She finally got a long-awaited taste of freedom, free to leave the house, go for walks, and meet her peers. Time passed. Courtney graduated from high school and fell in love for the first time. Michael turned out to be a worthy partner for her. She felt care and attention from a man she had never received from anyone before. After each meeting, Courtney was over the moon with happiness. Their relationship lasted until 2011 when they had a son. Michael, in despair, begged his beloved to move to him and live a full family, but for an unknown reason, the young mother refused him and did not move, continuing to live in the house Holden, and stopped all romantic relationships with Michael. By then, the Holden home was empty. The foster children had grown up and moved away. John Holden, Courtney's foster father, had passed away, so for a long time she lived only with her foster mother Judy. Michael was only allowed to visit his son with Judy's permission. During the period when Courtney's brother Joshua was away, their life with their son was quite peaceful. But after his father's death in 2014, Joshua returned and began to control the family home fiercely. He installed multiple surveillance cameras around their home on Hero Avenue, about a block from Rogers Middle School in northeast Spokane. There were signs scattered throughout the yard that read, "Smile, you're being filmed," and several cameras pointed in different directions. The security cameras made Courtney anxious again, for she knew that going outside could get her in trouble from Joshua for running away. Courtney's life once again became unbearable. Around 2015, Courtney confessed to a neighbor that she was once again forbidden to have a cell phone, keep social media accounts, communicate with anyone outside the family, drive, or even leave the house without Joshua's permission. The birth of Courtney's son made Joshua Holden so angry that he forced her to cut off all contact with Michael. Courtney silently complied. Neighbors noticed bruises on Courtney's face and arms, and when asked about their origin, she frankly admitted, "Joshua beats me." Concerned neighbors wondered why Courtney tolerates such treatment and tried to help her in every way possible. They contacted the police to draw attention to Courtney's distress, but the Holdens managed to keep the case quiet each time, as the victim herself never openly admitted that she was under family control from her brother. Eventually, Courtney was stripped of the privilege of interacting with the neighbors, who have since seen her outside only in the evenings, as she was not allowed to go out during the day. Courtney again silently complied. No one knew Joshua like Courtney did. A tall, large, and obese man, he possessed tremendous physical strength and never held back in his insults. Joshua's friends described him as a man with paranoid tendencies, violent and unpredictable by nature. He once publicly bragged about his ability to easily cut short a life and effortlessly dispose of a body. He had a notable criminal history. In 2005, he was charged with assault and harassment, but due to lack of evidence and the victim's unwillingness to cooperate with the police, he was released. In 2003, he was also suspected of assaulting a woman and misconduct, but the perpetrator could not be identified. In 2006, Joshua was arrested for assaulting his mother and for burglary. These incidents forced him to leave his parents' home for several years. Upon returning, Joshua became even more ferocious. He installed cameras not only outside, but also inside the house to completely control Courtney. The young mother almost stopped socializing with friends, saying she was afraid to go anywhere for fear Joshua would find out and things would get worse. One person communicated with Courtney every day via Facebook until Joshua found out she had an account. "I have to leave. I have to leave. Josh is coming," she wrote in her last message almost 2 years ago. After that, her account was permanently blocked. Acquaintances describe the dynamics within the Holden family as peculiar. People familiar with the family have been perplexed as to why Courtney's son calls Judy Mom, and Joshua is referred to as Dad, while his biological mother is referred to exclusively by her first name, leading some to speculate that perhaps Joshua is actually the boy's father. Neighbors and acquaintances have condemned the Holdens for their unusual lifestyle and antisocial behavior, preferring to stay away from their home. In August 2018, after another argument, Courtney hurriedly packed her belongings into a suitcase and ran outside. A furious Judy yelled after her, "Come home!" To which Courtney replied, "I'm not staying here anymore." Moments later, an enraged Joshua, over 6 feet tall and weighing 300 pounds, forcibly picked Courtney up and carried her back into the house. Judy slammed the door shut. According to the neighbor, she was unable to resist. That was the last time this neighbor, and possibly the rest of the family, saw Courtney. A young woman who had lived a life of invisibility, she still was. It took nearly 2 years before neighbors and acquaintances began to worry about her disappearance. In October 2019, a year and a half after her disappearance, concerns about Courtney Holden's whereabouts were expressed by Michael and his current girlfriend. They hadn't seen Courtney in almost 2 years, and the father was anxious to see his son. The father of Courtney's son filed a missing persons report with the police. On October 24th, police officers, armed with a search warrant, went to the Holdens' home and were surprised to find that Courtney was indeed not there. Neither Joshua nor Judy wanted to cooperate with authorities. Courtney's stepmother allowed the detectives to look into her room, but then asked them to leave the house as soon as possible. Search dogs were even brought in, but to no avail. The Holdens claimed Courtney abandoned her son and ran away. They were unable to explain who may have continued to cash Social Security benefits into her account, or who was using electronic food stamps. However, on the same day the Holdens' home was searched, Judy and Joshua withdrew the remaining $600 from Courtney's bank account. Coincidence? The next day, an unidentified woman identified herself as Courtney and called the National Crime Information Center of America. She stated that she was safe and did not want to be found. Police traced the call and identified the woman as one of Courtney's half-sisters. Later, Joshua and Judy told many conflicting stories about Courtney's disappearance. They once claimed she had run off with a truck driver, while another version said it was a secret lover she was hiding from everyone. Courtney's absence and the ever-changing testimony of those she lived with made the Holdens suspect. Clearly having something to hide, Joshua and Judy Holden hastily left Spokane in late October 2019. Their flight only convinced detectives of their involvement in Courtney's disappearance. The Holdens were tracked down in Texas at the home of one of Judy's adopted daughters. Authorities were able to charge them with cashing benefits intended for Courtney as well as identity theft, which led to their arrest and incarceration in a Texas jail. In early October, the Spokane Police Department attempted to check on Courtney's welfare, but that quickly turned into a missing persons case, which was turned over to Major Crimes Detective Randy Lesser. Lesser gave an update on the investigation after the search warrants he filed in Spokane County Superior Court became known. This account of Courtney's disappearance and the investigation is based on police interviews and court documents. Courtney was officially reported missing. Alerts were sent out to all states, and several news programs broadcast about the case, which began an active search. When patrol officers and detectives visited the home for various reasons, Joshua and Judy Holden refused to cooperate with the investigation. Unusual behavior when it comes to welfare checks and missing persons cases. On the day Courtney was reported missing, a woman who gave her name called Crime Check and said she was okay. The police dispatcher also spoke to the woman posing as Courtney. It was later revealed that it was actually Courtney's sister, who wouldn't tell Lesser why she was impersonating her, presumably to draw suspicion away from Judy and end the search. "It bothers me that she might be dead," Lesser said in an interview. Lesser expressed particular concern about Joshua's past. Joshua had been charged with assault in the past, but the case was dropped shortly before trial when the victim stopped cooperating with the prosecution. Investigators were in the process of obtaining DNA evidence, and court documents in the case indicated Holden was a suspect in another assault in 2003. Neighbors and family members described Joshua as unstable, violent, and diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. Neighbors mentioned that Joshua was unemployed and Judy was afraid of him. Joshua had also been arrested on unlawful imprisonment charges and was convicted of burglary. Family members said Joshua and Judy bragged to them about knowing ways to hide from police, and Joshua talked about how easy it would be to end a person's life and hide the body. "People don't just disappear, especially if they have a son," Lesser noted. Court documents say Courtney was a loving mother who would never abandon her son. For a year and a half, Courtney was not seen outside her home, with Joshua and Judy telling neighbors and relatives that she was traveling with a boyfriend, an unnamed truck driver whom no one knew. Sometimes there were rumors that she had eloped with her fiancé. Other times she was supposedly just at the house, but not available for visits. Judy told Lesser that Courtney had only been home a few days when he knocked on their door in early October. According to her, Courtney left on foot with her son. According to court documents, when Lesser asked Judy for her phone number, she closed the door in his face. She then reluctantly let police officers inside to look into Courtney's room. She was very nervous, Lesser said. The house was extremely cluttered, with piles of belongings taking up every available space, Lesser wrote in court documents. Courtney's room was also cluttered, and the mattress lay bare. It gave the impression that no one lived there, Lesser noted. At one point, Judy panicked, losing sight of one of the detectives behind the closed door. She ordered the investigators to leave when Lesser asked them to check the rest of the house for Courtney's son. Later that day, neighbors told Lesser that they saw Joshua, Judy, and one of Courtney's sisters leave in a van with the boy. Detective Lesser also found it suspicious that Courtney, who suffered from a chronic medical condition, had not seen a doctor since October 2017. She received her last prescription in July 2018, although she had been receiving medication every month prior to her disappearance. Despite the gaps in her medical records, money continued to be withdrawn from Courtney's bank account every month, and her card was used for groceries. Surveillance footage confirmed that Joshua and Judy were shopping with the boy. The cameras also recorded the couple withdrawing the remaining money from Courtney's bank account on the day she was reported missing in early October. By October 24, Joshua and Judy had left their home. Lesser wrote that the DVR from the home surveillance system had been removed, and the family's 6 pets were gone when police arrived to execute a search warrant. The cell phone numbers associated with Joshua and Judy were deactivated in mid-November, but 2 new numbers with Texas area codes were activated the same day. About a month after the Holdens left, a neighbor called police to report activity at the house. It was one of Judy's daughters and her husband, who had flown in from Texas to check on the house. They said they hadn't seen Courtney in 2 years and that Judy had retired. The man told police that Joshua and Judy had a child together, but Judy's daughter claimed the boy was Courtney's son. In mid-December, Lesser traveled to Texas to search for Joshua and Judy. Police found them at Judy's daughter's home along with Courtney's son. Joshua and Judy Holden were arrested on charges of identity theft, custody interference, and using Courtney's bank accounts and hiding her son. The boy was found safe and sound and was successfully returned to his father. No charges were filed against other family members. Police searched Judy's home in Spokane with search dogs, but unfortunately found no trace of Courtney. A search of a home in Texas also yielded no clues as to Courtney's whereabouts. Officers also searched a car and trailer belonging to Judy parked in an RV parking lot in Oklahoma. Joshua, 40, and Judy, 74, were in jail in Texas, where they declined to be interviewed by police. They refused to be extradited to Spokane, so police were awaiting a warrant from the governor for their return. Because police could not prove their involvement in Courtney's disappearance, they were likely released. This is probably one of the most in-depth missing person cases. Lesser says of the months-long investigation, "I have 4 notebooks full of different information." Judy and Joshua still claim they had nothing to do with Courtney's disappearance, and police believe she is most likely dead. But unfortunately, there is no way to prove it yet. Despite the aforementioned allegations, Judy and Joshua have not been charged with anything. Many still believe that they know what happened to Courtney. In addition to being known for his violent behavior, Joshua has also stated that he could end a person's life and successfully hide the body from the police. Investigators believe Courtney is dead, but have yet to make any arrests related to her case. To summarize today's story, Courtney was unlucky enough to be part of the Holden family, and this young girl who dreamed of family and love lacked the courage to stand up for herself. She truly believed that even these people who yelled at her, mistreated her, and forced her to work for them were her family. But is it necessary to defend oneself against one's own family? It is deeply unfortunate that Joshua Holden's bold statements in public about ending his life and hiding his body cannot be used as proof of his involvement in Courtney's disappearance, especially since she was never seen again after that fateful evening when he forcibly took her into the house. And no one knows what she went through during those terrible moments, or what atrocities these monsters who called themselves family were doing behind closed doors. There are countless ways to discreetly dispose of a body, using various chemicals that neither experts nor police dogs can detect. This suggests that if Courtney did suffer that night, her spirit still resides at Holden Manor, where she looked for family, but instead found her doom. Her son was taken from the Holden family and placed in his father's care, where he remains to this day. Courtney Holden is still missing in action, In April 2015, the small town of Leeton in New South Wales, Australia, came to a standstill. Businesses closed, and the local high school suspended classes as the community was engulfed in sorrow and mourning, gathering to honor the memory of Stephanie Scott and offer condolences to her family. Over 1,000 people attended Stephanie's funeral, and a public memorial was organized for everyone to join in the communal grief. Many attendees wore Stephanie's favorite color, yellow, releasing yellow balloons into the sky, symbolizing the liberation of her spirit soaring into the heavens. The gathering prayed for Stephanie's eternal rest and comfort and healing for her loved ones. The song chosen for Stephanie and her fiancé Aaron's first wedding dance played, reminding everyone of the young couple's cruelly interrupted story, filling hearts with sadness and sorrow. Stephanie Scott, only 26 years old, was kind, intelligent, and always smiling. From childhood, she was curious and active, participating in school clubs and sports. As an adult, she followed in her father Robert's footsteps as a teacher, sharing his passion for education. She taught English and drama at Leeton High School, taking great pride in her work. Stephanie and Aaron, slightly younger than her, knew each other from a young age. They spent time together, shared interests, and played sports in their hometown. They were close friends until Aaron turned 21, when their relationship blossomed into romance. In early April 2015, Stephanie and Aaron were busily preparing for their wedding, scheduled for the 11th. Stephanie, a perfectionist, had spent months meticulously planning every detail. Almost everything was ready, with arrangements set and a honeymoon booked in Tahiti. She had recently celebrated her bachelorette party. The only remaining task was to rehearse their first dance, for which they had taken many lessons. The first weekend of April reminded them that their eagerly awaited day was almost upon them. Aaron invited Stephanie to join him at a party out of town, but she declined to finish some remaining tasks, including finalizing plans for her students during her honeymoon absence. On Easter Sunday, April 5, 2015, around 11 a.m., Stephanie Scott headed to her school in Leeton, New South Wales, to hand over some work to a deputy teacher. She parked her car on the street and walked to meet a colleague who lived nearby. Together, they opened the school gates and entered. Stephanie then locked the gates behind them and, with keys in hand, proceeded to the English teacher's office. There, she sent an email to a bus company confirming transportation arrangements for her wedding guests. After working for a couple more hours, feeling joyful that all her tasks were successfully completed, Stephanie left the administrative building and walked towards the gates. Aaron, aware that Stephanie had left and would be away for a few hours, grew worried as the evening approached. He had texted her the day before and received prompt replies. However, on April 5th, he received no response from Stephanie. Returning home after 7 p.m., Aaron found that Stephanie was still not back and her car was absent from the street. Trying to manage his anxiety, he reasoned that perhaps the stress of the upcoming wedding and leaving her students for an extended period had exhausted Stephanie, and she wanted some alone time. Yet, such complete silence was out of character for her. Even amidst the excitement of wedding planning, Stephanie had been enjoying every minute, eagerly sharing details about her dress and the wedding menu. She didn't appear nervous or depressed, but rather excited and ready for her big day. With his concern growing and sleep eluding him, Aaron texted Stephanie again in the morning before calling her family. More than a day had passed since Stephanie's disappearance, and Aaron went to the Leeton police station to report his missing fiancée. The police, after inspecting the vicinity and noting Stephanie's car's disappearance, speculated that she might have left the school and been involved in an accident or gotten stuck in a ditch or creek. Helicopters were deployed to search the area, while ground police headed straight to the last known location of Stephanie Leeton High School. Due to Easter Sunday and the limited number of people at the school, there were few witnesses, complicating the police investigation but also ruling out hundreds of potential suspects. A check of the school's alarm system in Stephanie's classroom revealed that she had deactivated it at 1:30 p.m. and reactivated it at 1:38 p.m. This provided the police with the precise time when Stephanie was nearby, but it was the only detail they could ascertain. Detectives attempted to use phone tracking, but Stephanie's mobile phone was turned off. The last activities on her bank accounts or social media were on Saturday, April 4th. Local news broadcasts began covering the story by April 7th, while hundreds in the small community eagerly sought any information about Stephanie. However, such behavior was completely uncharacteristic of Stephanie, and as each day passed with her wedding approaching, hope began to fade. Stephanie's mother, Marilyn, stated that if her daughter was not found within the next few hours, it likely meant something terrible had happened. A reporter from a local newspaper in Leeton reported that the police resumed searching the school. They spent most of the day using digital mapping technology to study the school's premises, and specifically marked the room where Stephanie worked on the day of her disappearance. A witness near Leeton High School on Easter Sunday mentioned hearing strange noises around 2 p.m., like rustling and dragging something on the ground. He recalled seeing Stephanie's car under a covered walkway, but didn't think much of it at the time. Later, her car disappeared. Another witness, a school employee, told detectives about an odd conversation he had with one of the school's cleaners the morning after Stephanie's disappearance. Amidst the rumors and anxious talk about the missing girl, the witness asked the cleaner when he last saw Stephanie, and he replied that he hadn't seen her on the day she disappeared. When asked if he thought Stephanie might have run away due to wedding stress, the man strangely and nervously laughed, which felt unsettling to the witness. Additionally, the witness noticed that the cleaner's face had scratches. The police decided to question him for additional information. This was 24-year-old Vincent Stanford. Detectives had a brief conversation with Vincent, who explained that he stopped by the school to take out the garbage bins, although he wasn't scheduled to work that day. He claimed he was there for a short time because he was in a hurry to buy groceries. Vincent asserted he didn't see Stephanie at that time and couldn't help, but wished them luck in their search. He added that he left the school after 3 p.m. to go to the store where he always shopped. The police contacted the store that Vincent claimed to visit, only to learn it was closed on the specified date. This meant Vincent had reasons to lie about the store, making him a suspect in the investigation. Investigators decided to conduct another thorough interrogation of Vincent and went to his home, where he lived with his mother. When they arrived, Vincent was not home. His mother allowed the police to search the house, where they found a set of keys on a red and white cord, matching the description of Stephanie Scott's keys. While the police were bagging evidence, Vincent arrived in his car. He was immediately detained, and his car was confiscated. In the back seat, they found several MDF panels, seemingly stained with blood. Police also noticed tire tracks in front of the house, not matching Vincent's vehicle. Additionally, a used condom was found on the ground, with its wrapper in the bedroom. They asked Vincent where he was on that day, and pointing to a camera on the front passenger seat, he said he was taking photos. Detectives asked for permission to view the camera, and Vincent agreed with a shrug. When the police turned on the camera, the first image they saw was a photo of a burnt woman's corpse lying in a wooded area. Vincent tried to explain it away as just shots from a movie he had filmed, thinking they were funny. However, the police realized these were actual crime scene photos, with Stephanie as the victim. Vincent Stanford, the cleaner at Leeton High School, was immediately arrested. His seized phone and laptop revealed many photos of young girls, both from Leeton High School and from the internet, as well as pictures of women he obviously stalked. This painted a grim picture of his behavior. Although Stephanie's body had not yet been found, Vincent was charged with her murder on April 9th. News of his arrest quickly spread. Vincent Stanford, 24, was detained in connection with Stephanie Scott's disappearance and presumed murder. During this time, a search team found Stephanie's car abandoned in a secluded area, 8 kilometers from where she was last seen. However, her body was still missing, and the search continued. Detectives worked to identify the location where the photos with the body were taken. On April 17th, 5 days after last seeing Stephanie, another witness came forward. He reported seeing a car near a canal around 4 p.m. on Easter Sunday. A man got out of the car and threw an object resembling a laptop into the water before driving away. The police soon retrieved the laptop from the canal bed, confirming it belonged to Stephanie. Meanwhile, divers continued to search for the slain schoolteacher's body in the New South Wales River area. Reporter Natalie Cooper, in a live broadcast, discussed the ongoing search for Stephanie's body. The 26-year-old schoolteacher's body was still missing. Police scoured fields and vineyards near where her red Mazda was found earlier in the week. Police divers also explored the canal in the area, retrieving a laptop believed to be Stephanie's. Cooper mentioned a shrine near the site visited by many that morning. The entire community was deeply saddened, regardless of personal acquaintance with Stephanie. Her family and fiancé visited the shrine the previous night, lighting candles, praying, and comforting each other in their grief. The reporter also noted that police were desperately searching for any sightings of a white vehicle, believed to be owned by Vincent Stanford, the suspect in Stephanie Scott's murder. Witnesses were urged to contact the police immediately. Meanwhile, Vincent, in custody, voluntarily approached the police, requesting to speak with them. He divulged all details to the detectives, including information on where to find Stephanie's body. According to Vincent, on the day of the incident, Stephanie was in the upstairs teacher's room working on a computer with the door to her office open. Vincent was cleaning garbage bins using a pressure vacuum and needed to take some bins upstairs. That's when he noticed Stephanie. Vincent told the detectives that he suddenly had the urge to kill her and quickly went home to fetch his special kit, including handcuffs, Viagra, a knife, and cleaning supplies. He also Googled information about bride violence en route. Returning, he found Stephanie packing up to leave. When she walked past him, she looked into his eyes and smiled, wishing him a happy Easter. That's when Vincent abruptly grabbed her and dragged her into a storeroom. Detectives reminded him of the scratches on his face they noticed during their first encounter and asked about their origin. It turned out some scratches were from Stephanie's microphone and others from her nails as she defended herself while he tried to kill her. Vincent described how he grabbed Stephanie from behind, covered her mouth with his right hand, and encircled her waist with his left hand before taking her to the storeroom. He shut the door and violently threw her to the ground, hitting her from left to right. After assaulting Stephanie, Vincent used the knife to kill her. He felt compelled to do so, admitting to harboring many brutal thoughts and schemes, and having previously killed others. He speculated about having some psychological issues, clarifying that he harbored no hatred towards his victims, but simply enjoyed killing. Vincent then recalled feeling a hunger pang and decided to go home for a sandwich and coffee. Leaving Stephanie lying alone on the storeroom floor, he went to his car. After eating, he returned to the school, placed Stephanie's body in the trunk of her car, and drove her to his home, parking the car on the street. On Easter Monday, Vincent drove Stephanie's car with her body to a national park. There, he removed her body from the trunk and stripped it on the ground. He noticed many bruises and abrasions on Stephanie's face, including swelling on the right side and a bruise under her eye. He then decided to cover the body with branches and douse it with gasoline. He used a match to ignite the fire, which he discarded nearby. Vincent stayed briefly, taking several photos of Stephanie's body with his camera, then waited 5 minutes to ensure the fire was well lit before leaving. He abandoned Stephanie's car on a secluded country road and walked back to town. In response to detectives' questions about the brutal treatment of Stephanie, Vincent continued to deny such actions, although the officers knew it to be untrue. As a result, he faced additional charges of aggravated harm and physical injury to a woman. Investigators inquired why, in the photographs, the woman was undressed except for a bra. Vincent explained that he usually removes almost everything, leaving only the bra. He wasn't sure why he did this, possibly wanting a souvenir. He admitted taking Stephanie's bra. Regarding her earrings and wedding ring, Vincent claimed he didn't remember when he removed them from the woman, but likely threw them in a trash bin along with other items. In fact, Vincent had removed Stephanie's wedding and graduation rings and sent them to his twin brother Marcus, who lived in Adelaide. Marcus sold the rings and earrings at a jewelry store, then destroyed Stephanie's driver's license after taking a photograph of it. A 24-year-old man was arrested at his home in the Adelaide Hills around 7 a.m. Neighbors were shocked that the next chapter in a murder case captivating the nation unfolded right on their doorstep. It was shocking and unsettling for their small street and community. Marcus, Vincent's identical twin, worked on a flower farm. His colleagues described him as very quiet and reserved, hardly interacting with them beyond work.
During the trial, Marcus Stanford had no lawyer, and when the judge asked if there were any reasons he should not be sent to Leeton, he replied with a strong Dutch accent that he had never been there and did not need to go. However, the next morning, he was taken to Sydney under police escort and remained in custody. Stephanie's family was further devastated when the police announced a second arrest in Stephanie's case, Vincent's twin brother Marcus. Finally, the search for the missing Stephanie came to an end. In fact, while Vincent was still giving his confession, the police had already located Stephanie's body. A day before her wedding date, a burnt body of a woman was found in a national park 60 miles from Leeton Middle School. Detailed investigation revealed that Stephanie had been brutally beaten on the head with a total of 40 blows, causing her death. Additionally, she had been stabbed in the neck before her body was discarded and set on fire. Photographs found on Vincent's phone conclusively showed that they were of Stephanie. Vincent Stanford's guilt was undeniable, and both he and his brother Marcus were brought to trial. In court, events unfolded unexpectedly. Initially, Vincent denied his guilt, and the proceedings became uncertain. However, based on the presented evidence and police work, it was decided that the case could lead to a conviction. Psychological tests showed that Vincent was believed to be a serial killer, posing a danger. He displayed a lack of emotions and sympathy, was merciless and indifferent, often laughing and not taking the situation seriously. Several troubling moments from his biography came to light. Vincent Stanford was born in Australia, but his family moved to the Netherlands when he was 3 years old. They later returned to New South Wales. At age 7, he dreamt of committing a murder. At 12, he nearly strangled his teacher. Classmates called him a psychopath, and due to problems with violence and disobedience, he was sent to a behavior correction school. He said he could never adapt to society and was later placed in a psychiatric center where he was diagnosed with autism and oppositional defiant disorder. Vincent told the police that after being released, he tried to enter university or join the army but was rejected in both cases. Therefore, he worked at several different places before getting a job as a cleaner at Leeton Middle School. His initial contract was for 5 weeks but was then extended. While working at the school, he often hid in the women's restroom during student lunch breaks to watch them. Examining Vincent's mobile phone, detectives found he stalked girls at the school and 2 other women working in nearby shops before murdering Stephanie. Numerous photos of one young girl, about 2,000, were found on his phone. He also kept diary entries about her, following her home several times and noting when she left, trying to determine who else was inside. One entry read, "She's home alone at 15:40, enough time to abduct." He initially targeted this young girl, but when his plan failed because she left town, he turned his attention to Stephanie, who worked at the school. Upon careful examination of Vincent's car, it was found that stains on MDF panels confirmed the presence of Stephanie's DNA. Additionally, during a search inside the Stanford home, investigators found traces of Stephanie's blood on a knife, several condom packets, and her bra. After admitting guilt in selling Stephanie's rings, destroying evidence, and assisting Vincent in hiding facts, Vincent's twin brother Marcus was sentenced to 15 months in prison. The judge noted that Marcus's sentence did not include the possibility of early parole, as there is no such practice. Marcus was sentenced to 1 year and 3 months in prison for his involvement in Stephanie Scott's murder. The sentence was to end on September 9, 2016. Had Marcus not pleaded guilty, he would have been sentenced to 1 year and 8 months in prison. In October 2016, Marcus was released. Over 60 people signed a petition calling for an appeal of the court's decision regarding Marcus Stanford, describing it as pathetic. After his release from prison, Marcus briefly returned to Leeton, accompanied by his mother. However, the local community made it clear that his presence was unwelcome and his current whereabouts remain unknown. Marcus has apologized for his actions since his release, claiming he will cause no further trouble and admitting his actions were truly foolish. He regrets his inability to change the past. Marcus wishes to have no contact with his brother Vincent and does not seek to establish any. The twins' father, Steve, expressed confusion and fear over Vincent's crimes and has no desire to communicate with him. He rules out the possibility of meeting Vincent and wants nothing to do with him. Steve stated he cannot comprehend why Vincent committed these crimes, and frankly, he does not intend to seek an answer. On the day before Stephanie's 28th birthday, Vincent Stanford was sentenced to life imprisonment for murder and 15 years for sexual violence under aggravating circumstances. Both sentences were effective from April 8, 2015. During the trial, Stephanie's mother, Marilyn, stated that Vincent was unable to cope with his own life and therefore took Stephanie's, depriving her of a chance at a happy future. They will never know the full extent of their daughter's suffering, but the knowledge that she suffered is too hard to bear. Thus, the family prefers to retreat from the public eye to mourn their beautiful girl and overcome their grief. In the future, Stephanie's relatives will not respond to questions, participate in interviews, or television programs. The day after the trial, the family planned to celebrate Stephanie's too short and amazing life on what would have been her 28th birthday, the second birthday they've celebrated without her. A tea party with mint cookies was scheduled for 3 p.m., and Stephanie's mother invited everyone to join. The Scott family also called for stricter screening and evaluation of school staff to prevent similar incidents in the future and reduce risks to students like those faced by Stephanie Scott. Tragically, more than a year after Stephanie's death, her father, Robert, died in a bizarre accident when a tree fell on him, leading to his death. He was buried near the same place where his daughter was interred. Having lost Stephanie, Aaron moved to Europe, hoping to heal his pain associated with New South Wales. 5 years after losing his beloved, Aaron met a new love and announced his engagement to a woman named Samantha. The community of Leeton was deeply affected by the tragic story of Stephanie Scott. She will never be forgotten, and her life story has been immortalized in books. Stephanie's family hopes that people will remember her and all her remarkable qualities, her passion for teaching, helping, and mentoring others. They believe Stephanie embodied all the good qualities of a human being and made a significant impact on many lives. In her memory, her loved ones encourage everyone to be kind to themselves and strive to do good in the world. Stephanie Scott's story leaves a profound mark that inspires everyone to live a life filled with caring for others. In most cases, addiction is not a sentence, and many former alcoholics, for example, overcome their addiction, return to normal life, build families, and help others with similar problems to overcome the crisis. This is how the story of a young woman named Nicole Pittz began, who seemed to have a whole bright life ahead of her. The investigation in this difficult case lasted 6 years before the main suspect in the murder was in the dock, and another year it took to prove in court his guilt and send the criminal to prison for as long as possible. At first glance, this crime seemed perfectly planned and thought out down to the last detail, and the criminal himself for many years believed in his impunity and lived a full life, believing that he would never be brought to justice. But it was the little things and details, which the investigation for years collected in bits and pieces, helped to put the puzzle together. And now, let's try to make sense of this convoluted story from the beginning. Who is Nicole Pittz? Nicole Pittz was born in King County, Washington in 1973, on February 26th. She was the only common child of her parents, whose marriage broke up when the girl was still in school, in high school. Nicole grew up an active and sociable child, played sports, and was considered a real charmer. She always had a lot of friends. She loved trips out of town to the countryside, and the favorite place of rest of the girl was Lake Sammamish, located east of Seattle, where she was every year during the summer vacations. After graduating from high school, the girl went to Western Washington College, where she studied public relations. In parallel, Nicole continued to actively participate in sports, was in excellent physical shape, and decided to turn her hobby into a source of profit. She got a job as a trainer at a local sports club, where she quickly gained the respect of her colleagues and also gained regular clients who willingly attended group classes, where Nicole was an instructor. In parallel, Pittz decided to get a higher education in the field of management, and after she got a job in a large mobile communications company. Outwardly, she was always friendly, sociable, and ready to help at any moment, but almost no one even guessed how much pain and misery was hidden behind a screen of apparent well-being, harmful addiction. As a teenager, Nicole experienced a serious crisis when her parents divorced. For a fragile yet to the end of the unformed psyche, it was a great shock, and rebellious character and bad company turned out that Nicole began to hide from problems, whoring them with alcohol. All this led to a serious addiction that lasted several years and thoroughly undermined Nicole's physical and mental health. At that time, Nicole's mother Gail worked as a stewardess and was almost constantly absent from home because of her busy work schedule, so she did not notice in time that something wrong was happening to her only daughter. The girl lived with an elderly grandmother, who also did not immediately realize that her granddaughter regularly consumes alcohol. When the truth was revealed, alcohol addiction has already managed to do irreparable damage. To cope with the problem, Nicole was helped by her mother Gail, with whom they have always been very close, despite everything. She not only sent her daughter to therapy, but also attended AA meetings with her, helping her to open up and overcome her cravings for alcohol. By then, Gail had remarried, and her new boyfriend Rod was sympathetic. He supported her stepdaughter in every way possible, loved her like his own daughter, and believed that she could overcome her addiction. Nicole approached therapy responsibly, did not miss a single meeting, and quickly enough was able to overcome her addiction. However, as I said, alcohol took a toll on Nicole's health. She developed serious problems with her pancreas, so much so that she had to undergo surgery. But the worst thing, alcohol abuse at such a young age violated the reproductive functions of the body, so that Pittz could not have children. In the mid-90s, when Nicole overcame addiction and returned to a sober life, she met her future spouse, whose name was David. At that time, she just got a job at a sports club, and David was his regular visitor, Nicole. In turn, he also paid attention to the attractive coach and began to show interest in her. True, David was 4 years younger than Nicole, but the age difference did not embarrass them. Soon between them began a romantic relationship that lasted almost 8 years, and only in 2002 the couple married. They arranged a beautiful but modest wedding ceremony in Hawaii, to which were invited only the closest people to them. After the wedding, the newlyweds settled in the quiet town of Linwood, in Washington state, where they bought their own house and gradually settled down. Nicole was a very sociable and friendly young woman. She quickly made friends, and she also developed good relationships with all the neighbors. She simply adored animals and had several dogs. Since she could not have children, she gave all her unspent maternal love to her pets. According to neighbors' memories, David and Nicole looked like the perfect married couple. They were practically inseparable, often walking their dogs together and just glowing with happiness. Nicole loved to cook, and she was very good at it. She pampered a delicious home-cooked food spouse and also liked to surprise the guests who came to their house with her culinary skills. In 2006, just a few days before her 33rd birthday, Nicole mysteriously disappeared. On that day, for the first time, she did not come to the meeting of the AA Society, where she was the leader and inspirer of the group. Since this had never happened before, the other members of the group thought she had snapped after almost 9 years of sobriety. Pittz also didn't show up for work that day, which worried her co-workers, and in the evening the alarm was sounded by Gail, who couldn't contact her daughter all day, which had never happened before. She called David to find out what had happened, but her son-in-law replied that he couldn't reach his spouse either. According to her husband, he and Nicole had had a bit of a fight the day before, so when he tried to call her the next day and she didn't answer the phone, he assumed that Nicole was still mad at him. It was for this reason that David didn't start looking for her right away, but waited until the evening to ask his wife for forgiveness. When in the evening Nicole did not come home and her phone was still unanswered, the family decided to go to the police, but there their application was not immediately accepted. The missing person was an adult, and not even a day had passed since her disappearance, so the police said that there was no cause for concern. For this reason, the search was not started until the evening of the second day, because Nicole never showed up and her phone was unavailable. The police decided to start the search from the place where Nicole was last seen, namely from her and David's house. However, no clues or anything unusual could be found there that would indicate that Pittz had been kidnapped or something had been done to her in that very room. In addition, Pittz was missing along with her personal automobile, which suggested that she had simply left and decided not to return. From here arose the first version, according to which the young woman, after a family quarrel with her husband, simply decided to leave him or teach him a lesson, making him worry. The second version was voiced by Nicole's friends from a support group for people with alcohol addiction. In their opinion, Nicole could have snapped after years of abstinence and sobriety. In favor of this hypothesis was the fact that recently she had been taking strong painkillers, which she was prescribed because of a back injury and her pain. Nicole often exceeded her prescribed dosage and at some point may have switched from medication to alcohol. The third version was the worst of all possible options. Nicole did not return and did not give any news about herself because she was no longer alive. However, the family members of the missing person, to the end, refused to believe it and hoped for the best. Her mother and stepfather did not wait for the police to wait for the necessary time and began the search themselves. They appealed to all concerned people through social networks with a request to help in the search and share any relevant information about the location of their daughter. They also took the first flight to Linwood, where they began searching for their daughter on their own, putting up flyers with her photos and asking people who knew her personally. The police searched not only for Nicole, but also for her car, while trying to establish which route it had traveled on that fateful day. But the longer the search lasted, the faster the hope of finding Nicole alive had faded. The worst assumptions came true a few days later, when in one of the local park areas, a man going for a morning jog came across the body of a young woman. That day, he decided to take a shortcut through an unpopular and neglected area rather than his usual route. There he noticed something strange in the shrubbery, and coming closer he realized that it was a badly mutilated naked female body. Information about the terrible find was immediately transferred to the police, and the criminalists who arrived on the scene suggested that the crime may have involved violence, because the body of a young woman had no clothes. There was no doubt that it was a murder, and judging by the number of bruises, abrasions, and bruises, the victim had been severely beaten beforehand. The cause of death was asphyxiation. Nicole was strangled with her bare hands. It was a truly gruesome picture. As the car of the victim was still not found, investigators assumed that the main motive of the crime was theft. But the attacker decided to eliminate a witness, and since it was a young woman, she may also have been abused. The police immediately assumed that the body found belonged to Nicole Pittz, who had disappeared a few days ago and was being searched for all over the city, but she had yet to be identified by her family. When Gail saw her daughter's body in the morgue, she lost her senses. The mother needed medical help. Her husband Rod was also out of grief, but the reaction of the widowed spouse, many seemed a little strange. David did not look depressed at all, and his emotions were somewhat faked. However, then no one paid much attention to it because everyone experiences tragedy in his own way. While the search for the vehicle was underway, the police still believed that the car was the main target of the attacker, and the traces of the killer should be sought inside the car. Information about the missing car was placed in the media with a request to anyone who sees the car to immediately report it to the hotline. The car was found only a couple of weeks later in one of the parking lots on the outskirts of the city. The unremarkable gray Volkswagen Polo was noticed by the guard on duty because the car had not been taken away for a long time, but the guard had no idea that it was involved in a murder case. The police immediately took the car for detailed examination and necessary expertise. It was assumed that it was here that they would be able to find evidence and important clues that would help to trace the criminal, as well as to restore the picture of the crime. However, the investigators were completely disappointed. In the car could not be found exactly nothing. There was no blood, traces of struggle, or signs that the car owner was taken somewhere by force. In the cabin, there were fingerprints and traces of DNA only Nicole herself, as well as her husband, who also occasionally used the vehicle. Nevertheless, the investigators were not in a hurry to return the car to David, because they felt that the evidence is there. They just do not lie on the surface. The irrefutable fact remained only that the young woman was killed with particular cruelty, but the motive of the crime was completely unclear. The hijacking version now seemed untenable because the car was abandoned almost immediately on the other side of the city, and there were no signs of struggle inside it. The second obvious motive was violence, but this assumption was not confirmed. Experts found that the deceased, at least a day before the crime, had no sexual contacts, neither voluntary nor forced. But in this case, the question remained open as to why she had no clothes on. The third version was some personal motive or acute, unpleasant feelings of the perpetrator towards the victim. In favor of this assumption spoke numerous injuries, inflicted as if in a fit of rage. However, the kind and sociable Nicole, eager to help everyone around her, had no enemies or ill-wishers. This difficult case had all chances to remain unsolved, because after almost a year, the investigation has no new leads or directions for the search for the criminal. No one saw the code, and who abandoned the car in the parking lot, because the place itself was not crowded, and there were no surveillance cameras in the area. But what was strange was that the person driving the car was much taller and larger than the victim, as evidenced by the position of the driver's seat. Suspicious was also the fact that the case was assigned the status of secrecy, and information about the course of the investigation, as well as about new facts and found evidence, was not disclosed even to the relatives of the victim. That is, the mother, stepfather, and husband, in fact, were in the dark. They received only fragmentary information, for example, that Nicole's bank card was used at a certain gas station in the country after her disappearance. The police requested the footage from the video cameras there, but what they saw on them remained a mystery. Nicole's parents, despairing that there were no results and their daughter's killer was still at large, decided to conduct an independent investigation on their own. To do this, they hired a private detective to gather all the information and verify some of their guesses, and announced a reward of $10,000 for those who provide any useful information on the subject. The reward was later increased to $35,000, but it still didn't help move the case forward. David only showed interest in the investigation for the first 6 months, but after that he gradually withdrew, stopped communicating with his mother-in-law and father-in-law, and soon remarried and had an heir. For Gail, this news was a heavy blow because her daughter could not have children, and David constantly reproached his wife for this. The grief-stricken mother repeatedly suggested that the culprit could be her son-in-law, but many believed that in her speaks resentment, and the police seemed not to consider such a version at all. An unexpected twist in the case: it wasn't until 6 years after the crime that it was revealed that David had been taken into custody as the prime suspect in the case. For most people who followed the investigation, such a turn was a complete surprise, but not for Nicole's family and friends, who from the beginning suspected him and openly talked about it. During the long years of investigation, they seemed disappointed in justice, but now justice had been served. David himself, who by that time had changed his place of residence and stopped contact with his first wife's family, was discouraged when the handcuffs were snapped on his wrists because he thought that the case had long been closed and no one was looking for the criminal. He categorically denied his guilt and even agreed to take a lie detector test, which he failed miserably. As it turned out, the police also from the beginning suspected David, but no hard evidence proving his guilt. They had no, and to scare the criminal and make him hide, they did not want to. So all these years, the investigators were busy with the fact that the pieces of evidence to collect, so that the culprit was deserved punishment. David himself probably thought he had committed the perfect crime and no one would ever get on his trail. However, the crime had a number of oddities, each of which had to be checked. Let's start, perhaps, with the surveillance footage at the same gas station, where someone paid with the card of the dead Nicole. The footage clearly showed that the card was used by a man who looked very much like David, but it was impossible to identify him clearly because of the presence of a headdress and dark glasses. Despite the fact that this recording could not be considered as incontrovertible evidence, it was still included in the case file. The second oddity was the absence of Nicole's wedding ring, without which she never left the house. At first, everyone thought that the jewelry was stolen by a criminal, but during the search in the victim's house, the ring was found in a box on the dressing table. In addition, experts criminalists, during the examination of the body, found in Nicole's mouth a special dental mouth guard, which she used during sleep to prevent bruxism, teeth grinding.
Nicole had been prescribed this device shortly before the tragedy because she was experiencing uncontrollable spasms of her masticatory muscles due to nervousness, which in turn led to the erosion of enamel and chipping of teeth. This finding led the investigation to believe that the victim had been killed in her own bed while she was still asleep. This explained the lack of clothing on her, and the fact that the body was completely clean and there were no signs of resistance. There was also no trace of makeup on Nicole's face, which she always carefully applied before leaving the house. About the mouthguard, by the way, David could simply forget, because his wife began to use it recently. In addition, experts have studied in detail and assessed the position of the driver's seat in the found car, finding that the anthropometric data of the last person who sat behind the wheel coincide with the data of the spouse of the murdered. In addition, in the car, as already mentioned, found fingerprints only David and Nicole. If a third person had been in the cabin, there would have been found his traces, and if he erased them, then erased traces and prints of the owners of the car. And one more important discovery was made thanks to the rapid development of technology. The perpetrator, after his crime, in an attempt to confuse the investigation, several times used the victim's phone in different parts of the city, but in the same places, and at the same time there was a signal from David's phone. As it turned out, David also had a motive, and in this perfect-looking family, a serious crisis was long overdue. While Nicole was studying hard, working 2 jobs, and helping people cope with their addiction, her husband led an idle lifestyle. He never held down a job for long, liked to spend time in bars and clubs where he spent his wife's earnings on booze and other women. Nicole always responded with an emphatic refusal, and once her husband tried to get her drunk to force her to do it. Gail knew about all the horrors that were going on in her daughter's family and tried to convince her to leave her husband, but she did not want to do it because she loved him and hoped that David would change. And after Nicole's mysterious death, her husband rushed to get a large insurance payment and immediately started a new affair. As it turned out, a few months before the tragedy, David, who had not been faithful before, had an affair with a girl named Jane. He spent time with her in bars and clubs while his wife was busy working or studying. Shortly before Nicole's birthday, he brought his mistress straight home, where they were caught by the suddenly returned Nicole. It was this circumstance that became the cause of that very family quarrel. Nicole told her mother about the incident, with whom she was very close, and a couple of days later she mysteriously disappeared. Since Gail was aware of everything that was going on, she suspected her son-in-law from the beginning. However, the police insisted that the evidence gathered was too little to send the suspect to jail. Then the case was classified, and the family stopped receiving any information about the investigation, and over the years the parents lost all hope that the culprit will be punished. By the way, when David received an impressive insurance payout after his wife's death, he spent that money with Jane. Gail suggested that David's mistress could be an accomplice or inspirer of the crime, but she was only brought in as a witness because no evidence proving her involvement was found during the investigation. David appeared before the court in September 2013, but he continued to categorically deny his involvement in the tragedy. His defense lawyers initially insisted that all the evidence against their client was circumstantial and could not unequivocally prove his guilt. When it became apparent that there were too many incriminating factors, the defense changed tactics, trying to make David look like a victim. The story of pain pills that Nicole took after her back injury was brought up, and the lawyers also tried to convince the court that Nicole snapped and started drinking alcohol again, making her husband's life unbearable. But first, such claims were baseless, and everyone who knew Nicole confirmed this. And secondly, even if she had snapped, it would not have given David any right to kill his wife, and even with such cruelty. The guilt of the defendant was eventually fully proven, and for his crime he received the maximum possible sentence provided by the laws of the state in which the case was heard. David went to prison for 18 years. However, in 2025 he can count on parole after serving 2/3 of his sentence.
On the night of December 1st, 2010, Staff Sergeant Nathan Payet was in a hurry. He was late for duty at Nellis Air Force Base in Nevada. By a strange coincidence, his alarm clock, which never failed to go off, did not ring today. Nathan woke up at 11 p.m. and woke up his wife, Michelle. He took a shower, said goodbye to his family. Then he went out to the garage. He was about to put on his uniform and start the car. Suddenly, loud shots rang out from behind. Mr. Payet's children and wife came running to the noise. On the doorstep stood Nathan, bleeding and staggering from side to side. It was obvious that he was about to fall. Michelle was terrified and rushed towards her husband to pick him up, but not in time. The father of the family collapsed to the floor. Around 11:30 p.m., 911 received a call. "My husband has been shot. He's bleeding. Help him!" Mrs. Payet screamed into the phone. The dispatcher immediately explained to the woman how to administer first aid. Michelle tried to give artificial respiration to her spouse. However, it did not bring relief. After the arrival of rescuers, he was taken to the nearest hospital. Doctors did everything possible to save the patient. Despite this, it was not possible to bring the young man back to life. The neck wound became fatal for 28-year-old Nathan Payet. After Mrs. Payet was informed of her husband's death, her life was divided into before and after. An exemplary family man, a valiant serviceman, was murdered on the doorstep of his own home in Las Vegas. His death caused a public outcry. Relatives, acquaintances, and just concerned citizens were waiting for explanations from the police. Who could decide to such lawlessness? What motives pursued the criminal and was subsequently brought to justice? These and other questions we will try to analyze together with you. Nathan Joseph Villagomez Payet was born on February 12, 1982, in the village of Tamuning, Guam. The territory of the island is not part of the United States of America, but it is a possession of the United States. At the same time, the United States determines foreign policy and does not interfere in internal affairs. Guam is a small island in the Pacific Ocean. Due to its paradisiacal beauty and historical past, this area is especially popular among tourists. Nathan was not only born in an amazing region, he was also fortunate to have a large and loving family. He had 3 brothers, Matthew, Anthony, Eric, and 1 sister, Carmela. The children were very friendly and helped their parents in everything. Nathan himself was different from the others in that he never caused trouble. He was a caring child at home and a diligent student at school. The boy was very sociable, so he easily made friends. He was the soul of the company. His name was always on the rumor. Perhaps there was no one who did not want to communicate with him, recalled about him brother Eric. Living near the ocean, Nathan loved swimming from childhood. Later, he began surfing. He spent all his free time on the beach, enjoying the sun and life. Nathan met his future wife during his studies at South High School. The educational institution was located in the neighboring town of Santa Rita. Michelle Ann Vonta-Chuck was attracted to him at first sight. Young people began to spend time together. With each day, their affection for each other only grew. They never parted. Together, they studied at school, prepared for classes, helped with household chores. Strong teenage friendship was replaced by tender love. When Michelle was 16 years old, a terrible grief befell her family. Her mother died. Therefore, the girl spent all her free time helping her sister. Melissa, the eldest of Chuck's family, took on the role of mother and mistress of the house. Nathan supported her in everything she did and helped to look after the younger children. In 2000, after graduation, Nathan decided to propose to Michelle. The girl happily accepted. Their families did not have the opportunity to have a wedding. Therefore, the couple, with the blessing of their parents, decided to move in together. To earn a living, the guy got a job as a receptionist in a local hotel. He earned not badly. There was enough money. However, like all young people, Nathan and Michelle were ambitious. They made plans for their own home and independence. Soon their son Dion was born in the Payet family. The income was no longer enough to cover the necessary expenses. Therefore, the guy thought about a job that could provide his family with a decent existence. This desire led Nathan to join the Air Force. After graduation, Nathan was assigned to the Elmendorf Air Base in Anchorage, Alaska. Michelle was left alone with the baby. but the family had money. In addition, after a while, the young people's dream came true. They built their own house. In it was born a second child, a daughter named Niara. The head of the family made success in the military field. This favored the desire to achieve everything that he and his wife had previously been deprived of. Finally, 6 years after their engagement, Michelle and Nathan had a big wedding. My mom was extremely proud that her youngest son was the first to go out and achieve something, Eric said. In 2006, Nathan was transferred to the Davis-Monthan military base in Arizona. He was promoted to the position of weapons loading team leader for the A-10 Thunderbolt attack aircraft of one of the Essex squadrons. There he also trained in logistics training and material management. Nathan definitely loved his job and did it with dedication. Most importantly, he did it with the best of intentions. He was a son of his country. One of his co-workers characterized him. In 2007, Nathan and his family moved to Nellis Air Base. The new job was located near Las Vegas, Nevada. There, the young man was assigned as an assistant junior officer in charge of the supply section for maintenance of combat aircraft. Along with professional growth, the family of the protagonist grew. Soon the Payet couple had 2 more sons, Drawson and David. Michelle fell in love with Las Vegas. She thought it was the best place to live, so Nathan decided to make her happy. He chose the most suitable house for a large family, spacious and bright. In addition, the future family home was 30 to 40 minutes away from the military base. Nathan made the down payment with his savings. The only thing left to do was to divide the family's income and expenses wisely. Maybe he could save some money temporarily, at least until Mr. Payet's next prospects. At first, Michelle was delighted with her husband's surprise. She set about organizing the everyday life in the new house. However, over time, the demands of the couple began to grow. The family spent more than Nathan earned. The happiness of buying a new house began to fade. It is well known that financial difficulties have ruined the relationship of more than one couple. Nathan and Michelle were no exception to this axiom. The man realized that the deplorable situation had to be corrected. Therefore, in mid-2009, when the USA was at war with Iraq, Nathan enlisted as a volunteer. His departure took 6 months. During this time, the family's condition improved considerably, which Nathan could not help but enjoy. After a short rest at home, Sergeant Payet decided to return to Iraq. While Nathan was risking his life, Michelle was overcome by anxiety. She had intrusive thoughts. The prospect of being alone with 4 children frightened her. Accustomed to a certain standard of living, she found it hard to imagine otherwise. To take her mind off her worries, Mrs. Payet took a job. The firm that took the new hire was a corporate credit card telemarketing firm. Employment brought variety and new acquaintances to the woman's routine. In addition, Michelle wanted to have her own safety cushion. She did not rule out having her own business in the future, so she actively engaged in self-development. She began to attend the School of Aesthetics. Everything went on as usual while Nathan was at home. When he left, Michelle became bored. The birth of the children, the endless travels, and her husband's service cooled the relationship between the couple. Nathan was away for long periods of time, and Michelle wanted to be loved and desired, so she took a lover. It became her colleague, Michael Rudolph Rodriguez, 31-year-old handsome and a local womanizer. Plus, the man was devious and dishonest. He spent 2007 in prison for forgery and attempted theft. Michelle couldn't resist Sweet Rudy. That's what they jokingly called Michael behind his back. By the end of 2009, Nathan returned home. It seemed that the distance and the ordeal went in favor of the family relationship. However, this was not the case. The wife was playing a double game. She did not want to lose her husband, having an infatuation on the side. Therefore, she tried to please him in every way. Nathan was fascinated by the changes that had taken place in her appearance and character. The children had been growing up without a father for a long time, which had a negative impact on their education. He decided not to leave his family for a long time. It did not occur to him that the striking changes Michelle could be associated with treason. So pure and faithful was Nathan himself. In Las Vegas, a man found a good way to earn money. In order to get double pay, he started working night shifts. In addition, Nathan took up private teaching. He developed training for simplified baseball for young children. As for Michelle's pretense, it didn't last long. As soon as the usual standard of living began to fall, the spouse changed her attitude to the opposite. After a while, the problems in the couple's relationship went beyond. At Thanksgiving in 2010, the young family was visited by brother Eric and his wife Veronica. For the first time, the guests sensed the tension between the Payets. They had changed beyond recognition. It seemed that the former feelings between Michelle and Nathan completely disappeared. The couple could not hide from outsiders not only personal, but also financial problems, almost empty pantry and refrigerator. A week later. On December 1st, 2010, a strange communication took place between Mrs. Payet and Mr. Rodriguez. At 11:12 p.m., Michelle received a text message from Michael. "Hope you are feeling better," the man wrote. "Van Dyke's contract for tomorrow is almost finalized." 2 minutes later, he sent another text. "If you're not feeling well, let me know. I'll give you a couple days to rest. Remember, I appreciate your help." At 11:19 p.m., Michelle replied, "My husband just recently woke me up. Right now, he is trying to leave the house, but I think he's going to be late today. LOL, I'm sorry the contract is giving you so much trouble." A couple months before the tragedy, Michelle didn't want to be with Nathan, nor was she going to leave him, because she realized that breaking up wouldn't do anything, except headaches and empty pockets. "I don't think he will forgive me and support me after the divorce," Michelle thought. "The alimony would hardly be enough for a normal life." In addition, Mrs. Payet was aware of her husband's military insurance. In the event of his death, payments totaling about $65,000 were due to the wife. These sinful thoughts did not give rest to the woman's sick mind. One day she shared them with Michael. Surprisingly, he was intrigued. So the terrible idea of Nathan's former lover turned into a coming plan. Mr. Rodriguez knew that Michelle and he could not do it alone. It was too complicated. So he enlisted his friend, Corey Alexis Hawkins, in the criminal scheme. The 33-year-old mercenary had about 9 convictions, each one of them related to theft or fraud. Corey was a hardened criminal, so he agreed to help on the condition of a substantial reward. He estimated his participation at $20,000. After thinking hard, Michelle and Michael agreed. A little later, a couple more people joined their group: 23-year-old Jessica Austin, Corey's girlfriend, and her friend Shannon. By the way, Jessica's friend was not particularly intelligent. She earned her living by starring in adult movies.
Shannon was offered 5% of Corey and Jessica's royalties for her help. The fabulous money turned the woman's head. The original plan was to shoot Nathan in his Chevrolet Tahoe. After that, the criminals intended to drive the car with the man's body and leave it in the parking lot of one of the apartment complexes. Jessica had to buy the things necessary for the crime: men's gloves, a car cover, and a fragrance. Shannon's job was to provide an alibi for Michael. If anything, she had to confirm that on the day of the murder, Michael was by her side. On December 1st, 2010, Michelle felt ill. She deviated from her usual schedule and reported home at around 5:30 p.m. Michelle did not normally arrive so early. Her classes at beauty school were ending late, around 10:40 p.m. Mrs. Payet's foot crossed the threshold of the house just 5 minutes before Nathan left for work. On that unfortunate day, Michelle saw her husband sleeping on the sofa. She woke him up and suggested that they go upstairs to lie together. He didn't object. That was the last night the couple spent together. Late for work, Nathan went downstairs. Just at that time, Michelle was corresponding with Michael. In order not to arouse suspicion, the accomplices corresponded using code words. The instigator himself, along with his accomplice, was sitting in a black Cadillac SRX. The car was parked just ahead of the future victim's house. The perpetrators wore latex gloves so as not to leave any traces. Michael realized that the sergeant's military training could play into the latter's hands, so he decided to take him by surprise and approached him from behind. Michael drew his pistol and shot Nathan 5 times in the back. Michael quickly ran out of the garage, got into his car, and drove away. The perpetrators then fled to a previously prepared place. They burned the clothes in the fireplace and disposed of the rest of the evidence. After that, Michael with Shannon went to the hotel. In this way, the couple wanted to create an alibi. In parallel, Jessica engaged in a thorough cleaning of the apartment in which they stayed. Together with the emergency services, police officers arrived at the scene. They were stunned by what had happened. The neighborhood where the Payet family lived was considered one of the exemplary ones. Detective Todd Williams first decided to examine the scene of the shooting. The garage door was unlocked. There was a noticeable odor of iron inside the room. Blood was smeared on the walls in the car, and traces of it were also visible on the floor. Next to Nathan's uniform were his keys and wallet. Since the valuables were untouched, a robbery murder was ruled out. After examining the scene, Detective Lori Anderson decided to talk to the victim's wife. Michelle explained what had happened. For some reason, she added that the family was struggling financially. This gave the police some ideas. Maybe Nathan was hiding something from his wife, for example, a gambling addiction, debts, or an affair on the side. At least that would have cleared up the attack. Besides, all the evidence pointed to Nathan being deliberately set up. The police examined the victim's cell phone. It contained only pictures of his wife and children. This convinced the officers that Mr. Payet was a decent man. The investigation continued. The next step in the search for the perpetrator was to canvass the neighborhood. Statistically speaking, there's always someone who saw or heard something. This was the case with Nathan. Some neighbors reported that they had seen a car parked near the Payet house. The car was driven by a man wearing a brown sweatshirt. After shots were fired, the vehicle immediately drove away. Detectives finally had a lead. Nathan's family was shocked to learn what had happened. His family was on the first flight out of Guam. They were waiting for answers. His mother, Carmelita Payet, cried the whole way. The woman couldn't believe her son had died so early. The relatives finally reached the victim's home. Michelle threw herself into her mother-in-law's arms and then lost consciousness. Nathan's mother sensed something unnatural in her daughter-in-law's reaction. For some reason, the fainting seemed faked. The investigators decided to talk to Mrs. Payet again. They asked her about the car that the witnesses had seen. Unexpectedly, she said that her colleague, Michael Rodriguez, had a similar car. Why Michelle gave out this information remains unclear. However, thanks to her, the puzzle began to take shape. Police later determined that Michelle had simply blabbed the truth, or the plan the perpetrators were hatching was flawed. Detectives looked into Michael's identity. The man's criminal record heightened suspicions. He was brought in for questioning, to which he responded calmly. Mr. Rodriguez said that on the day of Nathan's murder, at around 9 p.m., he went out shopping. In the supermarket, the man met an interesting girl named Shannon. From his words, they had a long conversation, after which they decided to continue their acquaintance in the hotel room. Michael explained that they arrived at the hotel around 11 p.m. To verify the man's words, the officers called Shannon. She did indeed confirm the romantic encounter. However, the detective sensed a catch, so the next step was to examine the information in Mrs. Payet's phone. Specialists managed to recover the correspondence Michelle had with Michael for a year. Their communication was interesting. On the day of Nathan's murder, the couple discussed a contract with a certain Van Dyke. The conversation was more like encryption than a business negotiation. It was probably how the two men planned the crime. Investigators were almost certain that both were involved, but sufficient evidence had not yet been obtained, so they decided to let Michael go until the circumstances of the case are clarified. After examining Michelle's cell phone, the detectives called her back in for questioning. She was visibly agitated and seemed to be hiding something. Michelle realized that the officers knew more than she wanted to know, so she told them about her affair with Michael. A little later, she confessed that a few months before her husband's death, she and her lover had decided to kill Nathan. The woman explained that the action was planned in order to obtain insurance payments. Mrs. Payet justified herself and assured that she had repented and changed her mind. It was as if she had changed her mind at one stage in the preparation of the crime. She felt sorry for her husband, and she even tried to interfere with the plan, so she turned off her husband's alarm clock. Michelle was counting on her accomplices not waiting for Nathan or missing him. But the investigators did not believe in the woman's remorse. Her correspondence eloquently testified otherwise. In addition, she sent Michael a cute smiley face right after she learned of her husband's death. After a while, Shannon came to the police station to confess. The woman must have realized her predicament. However, her involvement in the case was clearly embellished. She explained that Michael had forced her to provide an alibi. Jessica asked for my help. Her friends wanted to teach a big drug dealer a lesson. My job was only to cover up the involvement of one of the attackers. I thought it would be a way to get justice, she explained. She then added that on the night of the attack, Michael told the whole truth. Shannon assured police officers, "As soon as I realized I was being used, I immediately went to the police. In addition, I feared for my life. There is no telling what they would have done to me." The woman's words were confirmed by the hotel's CCTV footage. It became clear that Michael and Shannon arrived at the hotel not at 11 p.m., as Michael himself said, but at 11:40 p.m. Her testimony led detectives to Corey and Jessica. Corey had long denied any involvement in the case. He knew what a guilty plea would do to a repeat offender. But Jessica did reveal her role in the sinister plan. To honor the young sergeant's memory, Nathan's family and friends gathered on December 7, 2010, in the chapel at the Nellis base. Michelle decided to skip the ceremony. She was clearly not in the mood for it. Many comrades remembered the man's stamina and military hardiness.
The commander of the squadron told about the feats he had accomplished for his country and his family. Everyone characterized Nathan as a reliable comrade in arms. At the same time, they noted his modesty and decency. In his speech, Eric Payet recalled, "My brother has always been an example for me and the rest of my family. He truly loved life, was devoted to his wife and children. Everything Nathan ever did, he did in the name of his homeland, love, and friends." On December 9th, the remains of the slain man were transported to Guam. On December 15th, a requiem mass was held at St. Francis Church in Tamuning. Military honors were paid to the sergeant at the Piti City Cemetery on the island of Guam. His funeral was spectacular. The cortege consisted of 36 motorcycles. Upon arrival at the burial site, 6 officers carried out a casket covered with a U.S. flag. Afterward, 21 shots shook the sky. Nathan Payet was given a hero's farewell. Michael Rodriguez, Corey Hawkins, and Jessica Austin were arrested without bail on December 8, 2010. The next day, the same fate awaited Michelle Payet. The police feared for the mental state of the accused. She was placed under surveillance to prevent her from committing suicide. On January 4, 2011, in Clark County District Court, the 4 accomplices were read the charges. They were charged with conspiracy to commit murder and robbery with a firearm, and murder with a firearm. Michael and Corey were additionally charged with possession of a firearm. The trials dragged on for 3 years. Some of the defendants denied involvement. Armed with a strong defense team, the defendants filed more than one motion. Their aim was to exclude certain evidence and proofs from the case. However, the court rejected all the applications. They only delayed the inevitable punishment by postponing the sessions from one date to another. On September 21, 2015, the trial for the murder of Nathan Payet did take place. Michael Rudolph Rodriguez was the first to stand trial. To avoid the death penalty, he pleaded guilty. On September 29, 2015, the man was sentenced to life in prison without parole. Michael's appeal of the sentence was denied. At the time the sentence was announced, the defendant expressed no emotion. Apparently, he did not regret the crime he had committed. The trial of Michelle Payet took place in a Las Vegas court a month later. The woman continued to insist that she had changed her mind about killing her husband. When the judge allowed Michelle to say a few words in her defense, she turned to the parents of the murdered man. With tears in her eyes, she apologized to them. "I loved Nathan and our children. I was very confused and made a big mistake," Michelle pronounced and once again fainted. The prosecutor said she did not believe the defendant wanted to thwart the conspiracy. There was a lot of evidence to the contrary. No one could understand how a woman, a mother of 4 children, could become so cold-blooded. The judge sided with the prosecution. Michelle was clearly involved in the crime, at least more than she claimed in court. Michelle soon pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit murder and first-degree murder with a firearm. This helped her avoid capital punishment. The Payet family also asked the court not to impose the death penalty on the former relative. At the end of the hearing, the judge called Michelle's crime incomprehensible and unfathomable. In October 2015, it was the turn of a third defendant, Corey Alexis Hawkins. The man also agreed to a plea bargain to avoid the death penalty. Corey was sentenced to life in prison. His attorney's petition to ever get parole was denied. The judge reasoned that the defendant helped plan the crime and was nearby at the time of the shooting. Jessica Austin also took a plea deal with prosecutors. She was later charged with conspiracy to commit murder. In March 2016, Michelle was given her final sentencing. She once again cited her unstable emotional state that led her to commit the crime. She again asked Nathan's family to ever forgive her. Carmelita Payet was a deeply religious person. She could see that her former daughter-in-law was remorseful for what she had done and was truly tormented by remorse. Her soul needed forgiveness. Therefore, Nathan's mother forgave Michelle in the courtroom. Afterwards, she added that the most important punishment in life, Michelle had already suffered. "Your children don't want to see you anymore. They're afraid you'll do to them what you did to their father," Carmelita explained. "Our family does not pursue the principle of an eye for an eye," Eric Payet informed her. "I think Michelle was shaken by her mother-in-law's words. Her family will move on without her, and the children will grow up knowing their mother is a murderer." Eric's wife, Veronica, also asked to speak out. She told Michelle that she hated her, after which she added that the relative dishonors the family name she carries. In pursuit of greed and the love of a man she didn't know, Michelle destroyed her family. She became the murderer of the man she once loved immensely, with whom she shared a bed and built a future. Could Michelle have imagined how her unbridled ambition would turn out? Hardly. This category of people lives in a perpetual pursuit of happiness without appreciating what they have. Nathan, unlike her, had lived his whole life giving of himself. He was often sleep-deprived, risked his health and his life. Thanks to this, the man fulfilled his beloved's dreams, but never found her recognition. The children of the Payet family will remain traumatized for life. They will hardly be able to create strong families and socialize. The painful experience of their parents will remain in front of their eyes for the rest of their days. There is only one good thing about this story. The 4 criminals will stay where they belong. The case of Lori Vallow and Chad Daybell, doomsday spouses. Crimes motivated by religious beliefs are not uncommon in criminal practice. Statistics show that every year, worldwide, over 100,000 people fall victim to religious fanatics. Often these victims do not share the fanatics' orthodox views. The case of the deranged duo, Lori Vallow and Chad Daybell, shook the world a few years ago and remains unresolved to this day. This story has been covered in media outlets across various countries, shocking and baffling people. It's a tale entwined with corrupt passion, belief in one's own exceptionalism, greed, and a complete lack of moral principles. 5 members of their own families, including 2 children, fell victim to this couple. Currently, the legal proceedings against the spouses from hell, as the press has dubbed them, are still ongoing. They face capital punishment for their heinous acts. However, they not only deny their guilt, but also seriously hope to escape punishment or receive minimal sentences. But let's start from the beginning and try to unravel this horrifying and complex story. an attempt to understand how people who claim to have found God completely lost their humanity. Who is Chad Daybell, and how did he become a leader of a religious movement? Chad Guy Daybell was born on August 11, 1968, in the small town of Provo, Utah, located 18 miles south of Salt Lake City. He grew up in a simple, even humble family, and was a quiet, shy child. Chad was an average student in school, without any notable talents or athletic achievements, and he was self-conscious about his weight. After finishing high school, Chad, not without difficulty, enrolled at Brigham Young University, BYU, in Utah, graduating in 1992 with a bachelor's degree in journalism. During his college years, he married a modest girl named Tamara, or simply Tammy Douglas. The couple quickly had 5 children, sons Seth, Mark, and Garth, and daughters Emma and Leah. After completing his studies, the young father worked as an editor at a local daily newspaper. However, due to the family's constant financial struggles, he also worked as a night watchman at a small church and as a gravedigger at the cemetery next to it. Since Tammy did not work outside the home and focused solely on household chores and raising their children, the family barely made ends meet. At one point, Chad decided to use his journalism education to write his own religious-themed book. His first work was published in 1999 and resembled a collection of religious stories or religious-themed fantasy. Surprisingly, the book became a hit, earning him a decent amount of money. Chad immediately quit his jobs at the cemetery and the newspaper to focus on his writing career. About a year and a half later, he published a book titled 1 Foot in the Grave. This was a popular science work in which he described his experiences as a gravedigger, pondered death, the afterlife, and soul reincarnations. In 2004, Daybell founded his own book company, Spring Creek, which he used to self-publish his works. These works discussed his beliefs about the impending end of the world, Judgment Day, and more. Some say that over the years, Chad's religious beliefs became more extreme. Chad Daybell published dozens of fiction and popular science books infused with religious themes. He began to conduct podcasts, audio, and video lectures aimed at helping people prepare for the second coming of Christ. Chad called himself an apocalyptic writer and claimed he could see the future, hearing voices of the deceased giving prophecies meant only for him. The Story of Lori Vallow, Biography, Early Marriages, Children. Lori Ryan Vallow, née Cox, was born on June 26, 1973, in the picturesque city of Loma Linda, California. She grew up in a large family, alongside 2 older brothers and 3 sisters. Her parents, Denise and Barry Cox, worked tirelessly to provide for their many children. From an early age, Lori was particularly close to her brother Alex, with whom she shared a trusting relationship.
He always stood up for his little sister and protected her. Even in her school years, Lori became a true beauty, with no shortage of admirers. An attractive, charismatic blonde with a slender figure and a captivating smile, she loved being the center of attention, and was a spirited and adventurous person. In the spring of 1992, at the age of 18, Lori married her high school sweetheart Nelson Yanes, with whom she had started a relationship in her senior year. However, the young couple soon realized they had rushed into marriage and were not ready for family life, leading to the dissolution of their marriage in less than a year. They did not have any children together. In the fall of 1995, Lori remarried, this time to a man named William LaJoya. A year later, the couple had a son, Colby, but their marriage ended in 1998, just 2 years later. The boy remained in his mother's custody. In early 2001, Lori entered into her third marriage with Joseph Anthony Ryan, who officially adopted her son from her previous marriage. A year later, the couple welcomed a daughter, Tylee, but this marriage too collapsed in 2005. Notably, soon after her divorce from Joseph, an incident occurred when her ex-husband came to visit the children. He was assaulted by Lori's brother Alex, who claimed in court that he was defending his sister's honor, as Ryan had insulted her. As a result, Cox was sentenced to a fine and a short prison term. Marriage to Charles Vallow. Soon after divorcing her third husband, Lori met a man named Charles Anthony Vallow, whom she married in February 2006. He was 17 years her senior, but this significant age difference did not pose an obstacle for them. Charles had been previously married and had 2 teenage sons from his past relationships, Zachary and Nicholas. The couple initially lived in Nevada with Lori's children from her previous marriages, while Charles's sons visited during holidays or weekends. Charles owned a small business that provided a stable income to support the family. Lori, who had not pursued further education, did not work, but her husband never reproached her for it. In 2014, the couple officially adopted a young boy named Joshua Jackson, or simply JJ Vallow, who was Charles's grandnephew. JJ had autism and required expensive therapy, which his relative could provide. Towards the end of 2014, the family decided to move to the Hawaiian Islands, specifically to the island of Kauai. By this time, Colby, as well as Charles's older children, were adults living independently, so the Vallow family moved to the island as a group of 4, Lori, Charles, Tylee, and JJ. The family settled in a popular tourist area, deciding to open their own beach bar specializing in fresh juices, smoothies, refreshing drinks, and non-alcoholic cocktails. Despite all their efforts, the availability of raw materials, and Charles's experience in trade, the business quickly failed due to intense competition. Around this time, Lori became interested in religious literature and was particularly drawn to a series of books titled Standing in Holy Places by the aforementioned Chad Daybell. She became so captivated by the occult writer's views and thoughts that she became almost obsessed with his ideas. She purchased all his works and read them daily. The meeting of Lori Vallow and Chad Daybell. In 2016, the family was forced to leave Hawaii and return to the mainland. They settled in Arizona, and while Charles worked hard to provide for the family, his wife Lori increasingly immersed herself in religion, drifting away from reality. In October 2018, Lori and her close friend Melanie attended an event in a neighboring town called Preparing People for the Second Coming of Christ, led by Chad Daybell. As a devoted fan and follower, Lori was thrilled at the opportunity to meet him in person. Lori sat in the front row, her eyes fixed on Chad. He also noticed the attractive blonde, and after the event, when the writer and religious speaker decided to personally engage with his followers, Lori, as expected, stayed behind.
She hung on his every word and asked if she could touch his hand. After doing so, Daybell looked into her eyes and said that they had been husband and wife in 7 previous reincarnations. Chad and Lori exchanged contact information and began communicating daily. A few weeks later, when Lori's husband went to Nevada for work, she invited the preacher to hold a gathering at her home. That day, about a dozen people gathered at the Vallow house, discussing God, the Judgment Day, and the Second Coming. Lori and Chad also agreed to collaborate on preparing people for the dreadful judgment. The pair started conducting podcasts dedicated to this event, leading sermons and writing articles. Lori became increasingly detached from reality and her family, but Charles, unfortunately, did not immediately notice this change. He thought it was a temporary obsession and would soon wear off. By the time he realized how far things had gone, it was already too late. Soon, Lori began talking about dark spirits and zombies, telling family and friends that she was chosen by God for a special mission. Part of this mission involved destroying the spirits of darkness, demons, and all evil. Charles's attempts to bring his wife back to reality failed, and more so, she began to see him as one of the dark entities that needed to be destroyed. The tragic end of Charles Vallow. By the end of 2018, the marriage between Lori and Charles Vallow was on the brink of collapse. In February 2019, during Charles's week-long business trip, Lori changed all the locks in their shared home. Upon his return, Charles found himself locked out of his own house, noticed his personal car, the family truck missing, and discovered that a substantial amount of $35,000 had been withdrawn from his account. Charles loudly called out for his wife and tried to enter the house. Lori, in a frenzied state, rushed outside, hurling threats and curses. She screamed that her husband's soul had long died, his body possessed by a demon, repeatedly exclaiming, I don't know who you are and what you've done with my husband." Without hesitation, Charles went to the police station and reported Lori for theft, obstruction to his home and children. He expressed concerns about her threats of physical harm against him, leading to the issuance of a protective order prohibiting Lori from approaching him. The statements Charles made that evening were recorded, a standard procedure. He spoke about his wife's excessive religious fervor, her belief in an imminent end of the world, and her tendency to classify people as either light or demonic beings. The officers, while asking clarifying questions, openly mocked him, but still issued the protective order. The very next day, Charles filed for divorce and changed the beneficiary of his $1 million life insurance policy from Lori to his mother and sister. His lawyer stated that Charles was concerned about the well-being of JJ, who required special care. He knew his mother and sister would responsibly manage the insurance payout and take care of the boy in case anything happened to him. As for Tylee, her stepfather had not legally adopted her and couldn't include the legally unrelated minor in the documents. A few months later, Mr. Vallow made the fateful mistake of revoking the protective order, hoping to reconcile with Lori and save their marriage. He began visiting his ex-wife's home, missing the children, and still hopeful of family reconciliation. On July 11, 2019, Charles was fatally shot twice in the chest when he arrived to see his children. Alex Cox, Lori's brother, called emergency services and confessed to the shooting. He claimed self-defense, alleging that Charles attacked him first with a baseball bat. In response, he drew a pistol and fired twice without aiming. The incident was witnessed by the homeowner and children. Their testimonies were somewhat consistent, and the court ruled the incident as an unintentional killing in self-defense. Notably, Alex's head injury was minor, despite Charles's background as a former baseball player capable of inflicting severe harm with a bat. The same day Charles's body was taken to the morgue, Lori threw a party at the house with music, numerous guests, and a poolside disco, right where her husband had been shot and where traces of blood were still visible. She didn't arrange for his funeral or inform anyone about the incident. Charles's sons, mother, sister, and other relatives only learned about his death a week later, when his unclaimed body was still in the morgue. A series of mysterious disappearances and fatalities. Shortly after her husband's demise, Lori sold their Arizona home and, along with her children, relocated to a town called Rexburg in Idaho, settling close to where Chad and his wife Tammy lived. Alex Cox, Lori's brother, moved with his sister and settled in the same housing complex. Lori enrolled her son in a school for children with special needs, but her 16-year-old daughter, Tylee, did not attend any educational institution. She was seldom seen outside, leading many neighbors to remain unaware of the second child's existence. Around the same time, Lori referred to her daughter as a dark entity in a phone conversation with a friend. On September 8, 2019, the children, their mother, and Uncle Alex went to Yellowstone Park, where Chad Daybell joined them. Several photographs from that trip showed Tylee, but after that day, she was never seen alive again. On September 24th of the same year, Lori withdrew her son's documents from the school, claiming he would henceforth be homeschooled. The 7-year-old boy was also not seen afterward. Less than a month later, on October 19th, Chad's 49-year-old wife, Tammy, passed away suddenly. According to Chad, she had a cold with a cough and presumably died from respiratory failure in her sleep. With no signs of violence on her body, her death was ruled natural. Chad categorically refused an autopsy to definitively determine the cause, a decision that oddly raised no suspicions. Following his wife's sudden passing, Chad received approximately $500,000 in insurance payouts. 2 weeks later, Chad and Lori traveled to the Hawaiian Islands, where they officially married in a beachside ceremony. This event came as a total shock and surprise to Daybell's children, who were still mourning their mother and couldn't comprehend their father's actions. Upon returning to Arizona, the couple lived together and misled others by claiming Lori's children were with relatives, or even asserting she had no children at all. They also rented a small unit at a local storage facility, where they later moved all the belongings of the children as if they never existed in the home. Another month later, on December 12, 2019, Alex Cox died suddenly in his home. The cause of death appeared to be a heart attack, but at his sister's insistence, no autopsy was conducted, and the incident was deemed natural. Investigation, arrest, and horrific discoveries. As time passed, more people persistently questioned Lori about the whereabouts of her children. She skillfully lied to neighbors and acquaintances, but it was more complicated with relatives. Her eldest son, Colby, who had little contact with his mother after moving away, tried earnestly to reach his younger sister. Initially, Lori answered from her daughter's phone, pretending to be Tylee, but Colby soon sensed something was amiss. Meanwhile, Charles's relatives demanded access to JJ. They wanted to take the boy for holidays or weekends or simply talk to him on the phone, but Lori consistently refused or made up absurd excuses. Eventually, the boy's grandmother reported his disappearance to the police, and soon after, Colby also approached the police to find his younger sister. When law enforcement officers knocked on Lori's door and asked her to bring the children for a conversation, she lied that they were visiting relatives. This information proved false, and the police returned to her home. They gave her a week to appear at the police station with the children, but instead, she and her husband fled to Hawaii again. On February 20th, 2020, Lori was arrested on the island of Kauai and taken back to Arizona. A search was conducted in her and Chad's home, but neither the children nor any signs that they had been there were found. Now her husband Chad, who had been defending her and insisting she had no children, was also under suspicion. It was only on June 9th that police discovered human remains buried in the backyard of the couple's home. Forensic analysis revealed that they were the bodies of the missing Tylee and her younger brother JJ. Chad was immediately detained for concealing evidence and complicity. The authorities then decided to exhume the bodies of Tammy Daybell and Alex Cox to establish the true causes of their deaths. In both cases, traces of chemicals capable of inducing heart failure were found, leading to the conclusion that these individuals did not die naturally. The trial process. The trial of the spouses commenced in January 2021. They faced charges of conspiring to commit first-degree criminal acts, grand theft through deceit, and insurance fraud. Moreover, the demise of Charles Vallow was reclassified from self-defense to premeditated criminal action. Witnesses testifying in court stated that Lori referred to her children as dark entities and promised to save their souls. There were speculations that the deaths of 16-year-old Tylee and 7-year-old JJ might have had ritualistic elements. Notably, the adolescent girl's body was partially burned. Weeks before, Chad had sent Lori an email rating people, where he assigned Tylee a 2 as a dark spirit. Given the totality of the charges, both spouses faced the possibility of capital punishment. However, in May 2021, Vallow's defense team succeeded in having her declared incompetent, halting the trial process. Simultaneously, all 5 of Daybell's adult children insist on their father's innocence, believing he was framed by Lori and Alex. In 2022, after treatment in a psychiatric facility, Vallow was again deemed fit to stand trial and answer for her actions. In March 2023, the judge ruled out capital punishment as a sentence for the woman, a decision the prosecution is still attempting to contest. In July of the same year, she was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. The trial against Chad continues, and he still faces the prospect of capital punishment. It is worth noting that this story inspired the book When the Moon Turns to Blood by investigative journalist Lily Sotail, as well as a 2021 television movie by Lifetime Movie Network titled Doomsday Mom: The Lori Vallow Story, starring Lauren Lee Smith. In addition, Netflix released a 3-part documentary series in 2022 called Sins of Our Mother, which includes an episode dedicated to Lori's eldest child, her son Colby. On an early August morning in 2015, emergency services received a call. Tom Martins, the caller, urgently reported a violent altercation involving his daughter and son-in-law. "He's bloodied and I fear I might have killed him," Tom revealed with a shaken voice. In response, the dispatcher quickly mobilized medical support. The phone was then passed to Tom's distraught daughter, skilled in CPR. The dispatcher calmly instructed, "Stay composed. Rely on your training, not emotions. We need to revive your husband." ready to start CPR? Meanwhile, first responders rushed to the upscale neighborhood in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. They arrived at a $350,000 home, noted for its stylish gray shutters and well-maintained lawns, only to find Jason Corbett brutally murdered. This incident unfolds a tragic narrative of a widower with 2 young children, who was in dire need of emotional support after losing his cherished wife. It also introduces a young woman, seeming like a beacon of hope, who stepped in to care for the children. Yet, it serves as a stark reminder of the dangers of hastily integrating almost strangers into close-knit family bonds. If Jason had been fully aware of Molly's mental health background and had known her more intimately, he might have reconsidered her close involvement with his kids. For Molly, meeting Jason symbolized a fresh start, complete with a loving family and the children she always dreamt of. However, for Jason, this relationship tragically became a one-way journey with no return. Molly Martin's life was the epitome of the American dream. Born into a wealthy and educated white family, she enjoyed a prosperous upbringing in Farragut, Tennessee. Her early years were spent in a luxurious mansion where she was the cherished little princess. Neighbors recall her as a reserved, somewhat introverted girl who was an adept swimmer despite frequent health-related absences from school. With the family's move to the more lavish Fox Run area, Molly continued her education at Farragut High School, participating in the swim team. Though not as skilled as her peers, Molly still felt like a champion in her own world. Molly's mother, Sharon, a math doctorate from the prestigious Emory University in Georgia, and her father, Tom, an FBI agent and seasoned lawyer, instilled a family motto: success is measured only by achievements, regardless of whether they were real or perceived. The Martenses were known as pillars of society, a family striving for prestige, wealth, and perfect heirs, ready to continue their lifestyle. From a young age, the children were raised with a win-at-all-costs mentality. The main issue was that Molly, the beloved daughter and little princess, didn't live up to these high expectations, unlike her 2 brothers. To maintain their societal facade, Tom and Sharon went to great lengths to conceal why. Molly was perceived as frequently ill, with a supposed issue in her left foot causing her pain and requiring numerous hospitalizations and surgeries. In reality, it wasn't a physical ailment that kept Molly from school, but her mental health. To preserve their external image, Tom and Sharon kept their daughter's issues within the family, with few knowing what happened behind the closed doors of their luxurious mansion. Thanks to her parents' influence, Molly seemingly secured a spot at Clemson, one of America's top colleges. In 2003, her photograph appeared in the Clemson University yearbook as a freshman, but then records of her disappeared. In 2004, Molly began working at the Visage Beauty Salon in Knoxville, where she met stylist Jeremy Taylor. The two started dating and spent a year and a half together. Despite their closeness, Taylor only knew about Molly's leg health issues, necessitating numerous surgeries and often preventing her from working. Yet, he admired her dancing and ballet talents, never questioning the intense strain on her foot. After breaking up with Taylor, Molly joined a dating site where she started a romantic correspondence with Keith McGinn. On February 22, 2007, nearly a year before meeting the widowed father of 2, Keith and Molly went on their first date. It was to Keith that Molly first revealed her bipolar disorder and some other accompanying issues. Keith, who suffered from chronic fatigue and depression himself, supported her and moved in with her a month later. Molly found work as a mammy, attended therapy, and things seemed to be going well. The fairy tale ended when she contracted a severe staph infection. The medication for the infection interfered with her bipolar medication, leading to a drastic change in her behavior. According to Keith, at one point, Molly was taking 16 pills prescribed by her psychiatrist daily, plus an additional 10 as needed. Most of these were for her bipolar disorder and manic depressive psychosis. Molly stopped sleeping, and their relationship rapidly deteriorated. In a bid to save their relationship, Molly decided to get pregnant. She always said that children would make her happy, Keith later revealed in an interview. Eventually, she got pregnant. I was terrified because I knew how many medications she was on. I was really scared. On September 16, 2007, Molly miscarried early in the pregnancy. Keith recalled, "She was devastated. But honestly, I was relieved. I thought it was for the best." 5 months later, in February 2008, with no improvement in her condition, Molly was admitted to a psychiatric unit in a medical rehabilitation center in Atlanta, Georgia. Her parents paid for the treatment. A few days after her discharge, she told Keith, "I want to go work as a nanny somewhere in Europe." He took it as a sign of her relapsing and didn't think much of her online advertisement seeking a nanny position. However, she soon informed him that she had found a job in Ireland and would be leaving for a while. Her advertisement was answered by Jason Corbett, unaware of the future nanny's troubles. Jason Corbett was born on February 12, 1976, in Limerick, Ireland. He grew up in a happy and caring family. His parents, John and Rita, raised 8 children, including Jason's twin brother, Wayne. The family valued emotional richness over material wealth, and despite financial struggles after their father lost his job, they strived to provide a nurturing environment for the children. To help out, Jason took a part-time job as a security guard at a school sports center. He was eager to earn money to delight his loved ones. Work ethic and the desire to support those around him were always important values for Jason, making him a favorite among family and friends. Margaret Fitzpatrick, or simply Meg, was one of those who had a deep affection for Jason. Right after meeting, they knew they were meant for each other. Married, they eagerly started planning a family, both desiring a large, happy household. In September 2004, they welcomed their first child, Jack, and 2 years later, their daughter Sarah was born. Meg and Jason felt true happiness raising their little ones, deeply loving each other and their children, and everything in their life seemed perfect. However, this idyllic life came to an abrupt end. On November 21, 2006, just 3 months after Sarah's birth, tragedy struck. Meg woke up with an asthma attack and, despite medical intervention, passed away in the hospital. Her death left 30-year-old Jason in profound grief. In his loneliness and sorrow, only his love for his children kept him afloat. His relatives supported him, understanding the importance of being there for him during this difficult time. Humble and kind, Jason felt uneasy about relying so much on his family for help and childcare. This thought troubled Jason. He didn't want to be a burden, although his family never saw him that way. In 2007, he decided to hire a housekeeper. The first candidate, a Czech woman, didn't click with Jason, so he let her go. Then he hired a Spanish woman, but the language barrier posed problems. Both women were looking for temporary work, not willing to stay in Ireland long-term, which frustrated Jason, who sought a reliable long-term helper. He eventually concluded that the best solution would be to find an English-speaking nanny seeking long-term employment. In early February 2008, he emailed 20-year-old Molly Martins. She sent a resume that, as it would later emerge, contained inaccuracies. Molly claimed she had graduated from Clemson University, although she had actually dropped out. She also stated she had been approved as a foster parent, which was not true. She made no mention of her recent psychiatric hospitalization or her mental health issues. Jason thought he had finally found the nanny he was looking for. The prospective housekeeper agreed to move to Ireland and care for the children. She was living in Knoxville, Tennessee, and flew to Ireland on March 10, 2008. The plan hit a snag right away. At customs, Molly faced difficulties due to her one-way ticket, raising issues with immigration services. She couldn't explain how long she would stay in the country and didn't have a work visa. However, she managed to resolve these issues and was allowed entry. After living in Ireland for 2 weeks, the cheerful American called Keith and informed him that she wouldn't be returning. They broke up over the phone. The children, Sarah and Jack, quickly grew fond of their new nanny and loved her. Jason was happy to see life stabilizing. Molly took good care of the children, giving Jason peace of mind. Over time, their relationship grew closer, and Jason started inviting the nanny out on dates. Jason and Molly, who began their relationship under unusual circumstances, faced challenges. The initial honeymoon phase quickly gave way to reality. However, Jason, recognizing the situation's imperfections, reassured himself with Molly's skillful interaction with his children. The couple got engaged in 2010. Jason loved his new partner, and importantly, He believed his children had also grown to love the caring Molly. After their engagement, Molly suggested moving to America, longing for her homeland. Understanding that the children would miss Molly, Jason agreed. A year later, he transferred to a factory in Lexington, North Carolina, and sold his house in Ireland. That same year, they married in a grand ceremony in Molly's hometown of Knoxville, Tennessee. Molly's father, Tom Martins, walked her down the aisle, while little Jack and Sarah played the roles of ring bearer and flower girl. Jason bought a luxurious home in a popular neighborhood, complete with an 18-hole golf course, club, pool, tennis courts, playgrounds, and parks. He paid $58,350 in cash for the house. The peculiarities began during the wedding celebration itself. For some reason, Molly told her friends that she and Meg, Jason's first wife, had been friends before Meg died of cancer. However, Meg had passed away in 2006 when Molly was not acquainted with Jason and couldn't have known his wife. Meg's death was due to a respiratory illness, not cancer. Regrettably, the happy groom didn't pay much attention to these conversations. Years passed, and the family continued their life in North Carolina. Jason joined the local golf club and became active in the community, while Molly worked as a swimming coach. Men were drawn to Jason for his friendliness, and women admired Molly's baking skills and supermodel figure. They appeared to be the perfect couple, an attractive and sociable husband, a well-groomed and athletic wife. They were the most in-love couple you ever saw, always holding hands, always kissing and laughing. They just seemed very, very happy, a neighbor would later say. Molly had been conditioned since childhood to maintain a prestigious facade for the public, no matter what was happening behind closed doors. In reality, the marriage was fraught with difficulties. Jason resisted Molly's persistent attempts to adopt his 2 children. While it seemed a normal desire for a woman who had stepped into the role of mother, her insistence became so intense and obsessive that it started to frighten Jason. According to his sister, Molly convinced neighbors she was the biological mother of the children and even described her pregnancy with Sarah to acquaintances. The couple constantly argued over the adoption issue. Jason felt unhappy, longing for his home, missing his friends, and the warm family evenings with his brothers and sisters. He seriously considered divorce and returning to Ireland with his son and daughter, which he honestly discussed with Molly. Her reaction was immediate and intensely emotional. After the argument, Jason even hid the children's passports, fearing that Molly might dispose of them to prevent their departure. The more he contemplated divorce, the more desperately she tried to keep him and the children with her. Jason lost his zest for life and began to gain a significant amount of weight, which infuriated his young wife. A husband with excess weight disrupted their perfect public image. The night before the murder, the couple attended a dinner at a neighbor's house, where Molly loudly criticized the amount of food on Jason's plate in front of all the guests. She openly stated that it was unacceptable for someone of his weight to eat so much. Jason left silently. The following night, August 2, 2015, Molly and her father beat Jason to death. On August 1st, Molly's parents, Tom and Sharon, arrived in North Carolina for a visit. The exact purpose of this visit remains a mystery to this day. Some believe Molly and her father pre-planned the visit to ensure Tom was present to assist in committing the crime, while others see it as a routine parental visit. Since Tom and Sharon arrived late in the evening, they decided to give the gifts they brought for the children the next morning. This detail is crucial. They had prepared an aluminum baseball bat for Jack and were planning to give Sarah a tennis racket. After dinner, Tom and Sharon retired to the guest bedroom in the basement. Molly and Jason went to their bedroom on the first floor, and the children went upstairs to their respective rooms on the second floor. According to Molly, Sarah woke her up at 3 a.m. after a nightmare. Molly calmed her down and took her back to bed. By the time she returned, Jason, she claimed, was awake and furiously angry, leading to a fight that ultimately resulted in his death. As the supposed altercation began, Tom, a former FBI agent, allegedly heard strange noises from his daughter and son-in-law's bedroom. Concerned, he grabbed the baseball bat intended for Jack and headed to the room. Upon entering, he claimed to see Jason choking Molly. Jason, noticing his father-in-law, tightened his grip and dragged Molly to the bathroom, threatening to kill her. Tom pleaded with Jason to release Molly, but seeing his requests were futile, he intervened to save his daughter. Tom stated that his initial bat strike didn't stop Jason from strangling Molly, so he continued to hit him. Eventually, Jason released Molly, attempting to grab the bat. A struggle ensued, with Jason wrenching the bat away and knocking Tom to the floor. Tom claimed Molly, in a state of extreme fear, grabbed a brick from the bedside table and struck Jason on the head. Both father and daughter, fearing for their lives, continued to attack the enraged man until they realized he was no longer a threat. By calling the rescue service, Tom described the incident as a fight where his son-in-law had assaulted his daughter, and now Jason urgently needed help. However, when emergency services arrived, the scene indicated something far more brutal than simple self-defense. The bedroom walls and floor were drenched in blood, with splatters also on the ceiling and furniture. Jason's skull was so shattered that pieces of his scalp were scattered across the floor. The medical examiner noted in the report that the number of blows was impossible to determine, as pieces of skull fell onto the table during the autopsy. The first responding police officers noted a stark discrepancy between Jason Corbett's horrific injuries and the fact that both father and daughter were unscathed, their clothes intact. Not even Molly's thin bracelet was broken, despite her claim of a life-and-death struggle. Another key observation. Some emergency responders noticed blood on the brick, and Jason's body began to dry out and he was cold to the touch, indicating a significant period of time before the emergency call was made. And why would someone keep a brick on their nightstand? Detectives questioned its presence in the bedroom. Molly explained she planned to paint the brick with the children and was examining it before bed, thinking about the design. The case hinged on appearances, the external details and testimonies of those involved. During questioning, Molly confessed she had endured years of severe abuse from her husband, keeping silent for fear of losing the children. She said she consulted lawyers who advised collecting evidence of abuse for a custody battle, leading her to plant recording devices around the house. She presented these recordings to the detectives.
Tom claimed during questioning that Jason had repeatedly physically abused Molly. However, the investigation found no evidence of physical abuse during Molly's life with Jason. At the trial, the defense insisted on self-defense. Jason Corbett was portrayed as a drinking, violent man who emotionally and physically abused his family. The defense even found people suggesting he might have killed his first wife, Meg. The family doctor testified about Jason's complaints of mood swings. He felt he was getting angry recently without reason. Social workers interviewed the children. Jack and Sarah said their father was always angry and even hurt their mother. The prosecution presented expert reports indicating that while the audio recordings made by Molly showed Jason's temper, they did not evidence physical violence. Toxicology reports also found traces of a psychiatric medication prescribed to Molly in Jason's blood, suggesting this may have caused his mood irregularities. Jason's family, who knew him as a calm and kind man, were shocked by the defense's claims and insisted that Molly fabricated the story and likely drugged him with illegal drugs to cause behavioral instability for her records. A bloodstain pattern analyst called by the prosecution testified that the blood spatter trajectory did not match a self-defense scenario. The attack on Jason began while he was getting up, and he was defenseless, lying face down when he was repeatedly struck. In 2017, Molly and Tom were found guilty of murder and sentenced to 20 to 25 years each in prison. They filed an appeal a week later and eventually succeeded in getting the North Carolina Supreme Court to overturn their second-degree murder conviction in 2021, leading to a new trial. They were released on $200,000 bail, leaving Davidson County Jail within an hour of each other. In October 2023, father and daughter made a plea deal for involuntary manslaughter. During the November trial, statements from Jason Corbett's now-grown children, Jack and Sarah, living with their aunt in Ireland, were heard. 17-year-old Sarah Corbett stated that defense witnesses and attorneys distorted her words when she was 8 to aid Molly Corbett and Tom Martins in obtaining lighter prison sentences. Molly Martins taught me to shoplift, vomit, and lie. She used to hit my brother and starve him. When I was just 5, she told me my father killed my mother. I really loved Molly, and she manipulated me. Jack Corbett confessed in his statement that he lied to investigators when he was 10. I lost so much of myself since that day. My words were used as a weapon to help Molly and Thomas avoid punishment for killing my father. I never saw my father harm Molly. He was a loving and honorable man, and they did everything to tarnish his good name. While my friends enjoy parties, I'm in therapy, learning to live with the fact that I lied and helped them get away. The children asked Judge Hall to sentence Molly Corbett and Thomas Martins to the maximum 25 years. Perhaps their plea deal helped them avoid this sentence. In November 2023, father and daughter were sentenced to a minimum of 4 and a maximum of 6 years, with credit for the 44 months already served. They were also ordered to avoid contact with the Corbett family. Thomas Martin's lawyer expects his client to be released in 7 months. Sarah, with her Aunt Tracy's help, wrote and published a series of children's books aimed at helping kids cope with loneliness after losing a loved one. Jack became a singer, songwriter, and skilled rugby player. Both siblings continue to fight for justice in their father's case.
Why do people commit crimes? Human nature is complex and multifaceted, and every action has its reason. This time, we will not discuss people with mental health issues and their tendencies towards violence. We will also exclude military personnel, individuals whose job is directly connected with eliminating enemies. It seems that the primary motives for life-threatening acts are material gain, revenge, exceeding the limits of necessary defense, and accidental incidents. Most crimes occurred domestically during conflicts and disputes when it seemed like everything was fine. However, these acts of violence are not a cause, but a consequence of human spirit degradation, leaving a permanent mark. On the morning of January 12, 2019, it was reported that 65-year-old Michael Redlick had passed away. Known in his circles, the former NBA executive with the Memphis Grizzlies and a beloved professor at the University of Central Florida died from a heart attack initially. However, upon the arrival of emergency services, it became clear that Mr. Redlick died from a stab wound to the chest. Various theories were considered, including self-inflicted harm. Later, forensic experts determined that the incident was a criminal act of taking a life. Sometime later, the perpetrator was identified. The person who helped Michael meet his end was his beloved wife. By June 2022, she stood trial. Yet this story is not straightforward. She did not admit guilt for the intentional crime and frequently changed her testimony. The legal battle between the prosecution and defense was long and heated. Ultimately, the court's verdict was unexpected for everyone. What really happened in the Winter Park suburb of Florida, USA? Who was the true victim? And could the tragedy have been prevented? Let's explore together. Sitting in the defendant's chair is 46-year-old Danielle Redlick. The accused is of short stature and slim build. Her chestnut hair has visibly grayed, either because she had no opportunity to visit a hairdresser, having spent about 3 years in custody, or perhaps the gray is a testament to her true turmoil and stress. Until 2019, she was just an ordinary working American woman, a mother of 2 wonderful children. A specialist in multimedia communications, she was not particularly well known. However, after the crime against her husband, her name was frequently highlighted in the media. This is what happens when the dirty laundry of seemingly respectable spouses is aired publicly. Danielle was born in 1976 in Florida. After some time, her family moved to Cleveland, Ohio. Her childhood was typical in many ways. She grew up kind and well-mannered with a creative nature. Danielle was the eldest child in her family. As she matured, her appreciation for beauty intensified. She enrolled at Valencia College, where she earned an Associate of Arts degree. Later, she was admitted to the psychology department at Baldwin Wallace University. In 1996, Danielle's mother, Caitlin Aquino, remarried. However, the marriage was short-lived, lasting only 2 years, after which Caitlin passed away from cancer. It turns out that she had been battling breast cancer for a long time. Thanks to her husband's comprehensive insurance, she received high-quality medical care, which was the primary reason for legally formalizing their marriage. Unfortunately, the treatment ultimately did not yield the desired result. After his wife's death, the man became not only a widower, but also a true father to her children. Since it was difficult for him to raise them alone, he asked for help from Caitlin, the eldest daughter. At that time, 22-year-old Danielle was living independently, but responded to the request. Thus, after Caitlin's death, Danielle, her brother and sister, and their stepfather, Michael Redlick, all ended up under one roof. Yes, you heard right. The very same Michael, who later became Danielle's husband and was perpetrated on a winter evening in 2019. At first, their relationship was built on friendship. Danielle took care of the younger kids and worked part-time at a bar at night.
Michael was building his career in professional sports, involved in player recruitment. He grew very attached to the children who became like his own. He also felt comfortable with Danielle. Over time, she saw him as a dependable support. Despite the 20-year age difference, their interaction was easy and natural. Gradually, the man and woman grew closer. Neither age nor status bothered them. However, Danielle initially didn't want to make their relationship public to her family and kept it hidden for a while. With his new partner, Michael felt younger and more energetic, and she felt loved and protected. Since he had good connections, he easily found her a new job in an advertising agency. Besides, he had a high income and devoted all his free time to the family. Overall, things were going well for both of them. After some time, Mr. Redlick received a tempting job offer. He was invited to become the vice president of corporate sales for the Memphis Grizzlies basketball club. However, the new job required moving to another state. Without hesitation, he asked Danielle to come with him. But she hesitated. Danielle didn't want to change her familiar lifestyle, and she was still studying, so she declined. Yet their relationship continued long distance, and the lovers often saw each other. One day, he showed her the house he had bought for them, impressing her. The cottage was located in a picturesque area by the Mississippi River. The neighborhood was quiet and cozy. Ultimately, Danielle decided to move and live together. To ensure she had no doubts, he found her an interesting job in the radio industry. Later, Danielle recalled that at first, everything was perfect. It was only Michael's job that later brought changes. Many years later, during the trial against Danielle, her 15-year-old daughter Jaden testified. She spoke of how Michael was an excellent father who did a lot for his family. Along with her 8-year-old brother Sawyer, they attended one of the best schools, hoping to pursue careers in sports thanks to their dad's encouragement and support in enrolling them in sports programs. Jaden was close to her father, which she couldn't say about her mother, whom she saw as hysterical, manipulative, and toxic at times. The young lady believed that Danielle instigated all the conflicts at home while Michael tried to keep the family and peace intact. But was it really as the elder daughter perceived? And what caused discord in what seemed like a happy and united family? Mr. Redlick's new position came with increased responsibility and stress, and he had a difficult relationship with the management. This took a toll on him. He became very stressed and tired. Eventually, to relax and unwind, Michael turned to alcoholic beverages. Over time, this became a daily occurrence. He would often stay out late, returning home intoxicated and angry. The tension in the house was palpable. Danielle tried to support her husband, understanding his condition. After talking to her, it seemed he would calm down and promise to stop. But his promises were short-lived. One time, Michael missed a dinner they had planned together, which was not the first occurrence. But this time, they had specifically arranged to spend the evening together. Danielle was very upset and stated that if he couldn't make time for her, he should have warned her so she could make other plans. Heading towards the door, she made an ill-timed joke, which struck a nerve with Michael. He stood in the doorway and hit her across the face. The slap was so forceful that she staggered back. She then noticed that her clothes and the floor were splattered with blood. In shock, she recoiled from her husband, who began crying and apologizing. Clearly distressed, Michael tried to make amends immediately. He took his wife to a familiar sports doctor and explained what had happened. The doctor examined the unfortunate victim and provided first aid, then recommended seeing a dentist and a plastic surgeon, as the injuries were quite severe. Danielle even had a front tooth chipped.
The next day, Michael arranged a memorable dinner, was very attentive and caring. Undoubtedly, his wife forgave him and did not report the incident anywhere. There was a fairly strict domestic violence law in the state, so Mrs. Redlick felt sympathy for her husband and decided not to cause him any further trouble. In fact, this was not the first warning sign. Danielle had already encountered similar behavior before. The incident happened while they were living together in Cleveland. At a concert, Danielle chatted with an ex-boyfriend, which made Michael jealous. On their way home, he dropped a few sarcastic comments about it. Danielle responded in kind. Unexpectedly, he hit her, then immediately apologized, noting that he did it because she hurt his feelings. Danielle forgave her partner, blaming herself as well. Over time, the incident was forgotten. After all, things happen in relationships. In 2003, the Redlicks welcomed their first child, a daughter named Jayton. A year later, the couple decided to legalize their relationship. It was a bright period in their lives. Everything was going well. However, Michael still faced challenges at work. The management changed, and he couldn't get the promotion he had hoped for. 7 years later, the family grew with the addition of a son named Sawyer. The parents were fully engaged in raising their children. If it weren't for Michael's job. The tension escalated, and he began drinking again. This led to more frequent conflicts. During one argument, he grabbed Danielle by the throat and pinned her against the wall, which terrified her. This time, his wife couldn't tolerate the rough behavior. She packed up, took the children, and moved in with her relatives. It's worth noting, they did not approve of the marriage initially, but eventually came to terms with it. Michael repeatedly visited her, apologizing and asking her to come back home. After some time, their relationship was restored. The following years were unstable. The Redlicks moved several times. The family patriarch was offered a job in California, where they lived for about 5 years. This period could hardly be called successful. The man again struggled with his issues and continued to indulge in drinking. There came a time when both spouses were unemployed and lived off their savings. In 2014, another move was on the horizon, this time to Indiana. However, the prospects were promising. To find a new home and settle matters, the man went ahead first. Danielle stayed in California with the children. They needed time to sell their old property and belongings. The constant moving had also become exhausting. It was difficult for the children to adapt to the rapidly changing environments. The whole process took a year. During this time, the family's financial situation improved. However, the marital relationship underwent changes. The distance and infrequent meetings affected them. Danielle and Michael grew distant and barely communicated. When the spouses finally reunited, they faced new issues. At one point, Danielle began to suspect her husband of infidelity. He became unusually cold and distant, and the former passion had faded. However, Michael found the strength to confess that his age and health were to blame. He had been embarrassed to mention this earlier, fearing he would lose his younger wife, but Danielle was grateful for his honesty and supported him as before. After trying numerous medications, the couple decided to undergo a course of hormone injections. Testosterone injections helped Michael rejuvenate physically and mentally. He seemed to become younger, regaining his former energy and vigor. With this came an increase in his aggressiveness. One evening, while watching a movie together, Michael fell asleep. Danielle went upstairs to rest. The next morning, he entered the bathroom while she was brushing her teeth and struck her on the head. He justified his action by saying she had not woken him up the evening before. She responded that she was tired of this and was leaving. This only angered him further, and he began to choke her. Poor Danielle could not defend herself and began to lose consciousness. At one moment, she felt like she was dying. After some time, Mrs. Redlick opened her eyes and saw her husband standing over her, scared and confused, begging for forgiveness.
All Danielle could do was silently crawl away. After this incident, they continued to live in the same house and raise their children together. But from that time, their relationship fundamentally changed. Apparently, a point of no return had been reached. The man began to drink more frequently, and conflicts in the home increased, even over trivial matters. The number of times Michael's discontent escalated into physical aggression increased. However, the woman did not leave him. Despite her dissatisfaction with the situation and resentment towards her husband, she continued to love him deeply. The ongoing situation also affected Danielle. She became nervous and irritable, withdrew into herself. To distract herself, she took up photography. Nevertheless, their family still appeared respectable, as most of their disagreements did not extend beyond the home. By the end of 2014, the Redlicks finally settled in Florida. This time, Michael decided to change his career path, tired of the constant stress. He took a position as Director of External Affairs and Partnership Programs at the University of Central Florida and began teaching. Although his income was less than what he made in the NBA, the job brought him enjoyment and stability. Initially, the family rented a home, but after a year, they purchased their own property in the quaint area of Winter Park. Their family home was impressive. The house was designed in a Mediterranean style and had a huge square footage. Danielle favored the attic floor, which served as her retreat. She often spent nights there, especially when Michael had bouts of anger. Testosterone injections rejuvenated him and restored their intimate life, but even during intimate moments, he could be harsh. Their relationship remained tense and unstable. Against this backdrop, Danielle developed an alcohol dependency. While Michael worked and supported the family, Danielle managed the household and children, increasingly withdrawing into herself. The numerous disputes eventually led to the couple separating in 2016. Despite this, Michael continued to see the children and support them financially, paying the bills. By this time, Danielle had found a job at a school. New acquaintances helped her out of her depression, and her responsibilities restored her independence. However, she still continued to see Michael. He could come and go as he pleased. During one of these days, another argument ensued, after which Danielle ended up in the hospital with a concussion. She kept silent again and did not tell the truth about what happened, fearing it would cause problems for her husband. But this time, Michael took her silence for granted. During questioning, Danielle confessed that in early October 2016, something extraordinary happened. Her husband had tried to run her over with his car. She was saved only because she managed to jump into the bushes. After this, Danielle went to the police department. However, when detectives began to inquire in detail about the incident, she changed her mind and left. The reason was the same as always. Later, the couple reconciled and moved back in together. However, this turned out to be a fateful decision for both of them. At around 9 a.m. on January 12, 2019, a 911 call was made. On the other end of the line, a woman introduced herself as Danielle Redlick and reported that her husband Michael had died from a heart attack. When the rescue service arrived at the scene and entered the house, they immediately noticed a strong smell of cleaning agent. At the entrance to the living room, the team encountered a bucket filled with pink-colored water. Beyond this, a scene from a thriller unfolded. A man lay on the floor in a pool of blood, lifeless. It was clear that the unfortunate man had not died from a heart attack as his wife had claimed, but from a penetrating knife wound. The woman who made the call was also found with cuts on her wrists. Paramedics provided first aid before taking her to the hospital. Following them, the police began their investigation. When law enforcement examined the scene, they were certain that Michael Redlick's life had been taken. It was unlikely that he could have inflicted such a fatal injury on himself. Later, forensic analysis confirmed that the blood traces in the home belonged to the deceased. The pink liquid in the bucket at the entrance was nothing but diluted blood. Someone, possibly the homeowner herself, had tried to erase a trail leading from the bedroom to the living room, indicating that the body had been dragged. Despite the cleaning efforts, not all evidence was destroyed. Blood spatter was found in the corners of the room and on the walls. Moreover, a large knife lay at the entrance to the kitchen, and 3 smaller knives were found in the sink. Detectives were eager to speak with Danielle. Therefore, once doctors reported that her injuries were not life-threatening, she was questioned. During the interview, she repeatedly changed her statements. Initially, she claimed to have thought her husband died of heart disease. Later, she stated that he had taken his own life following an argument. However, experts refuted her claims. Such a wound is difficult to self-inflict, and individuals intending to end their life usually choose a simpler and less painful method. The autopsy showed that Michael died from blood loss. With timely medical help, his life could have been saved. Additionally, he had a lacerated left eye. Toxicological tests also revealed a high level of alcohol in his system. The investigation revealed that a few days before the incident, there was an argument between the spouses, witnessed by their elder daughter. Michael had been drinking and burst into the bathroom where Danielle was hiding. However, their daughter Jaden intervened, taking the bottle away from him. After this, Danielle left the house and returned once her husband had fallen asleep. According to the girl, it was the first time she had seen such a burst of anger in her father, for which he later apologized multiple times. She still maintained that he was a loving and caring father, while asserting that her mother was the instigator of conflicts. The next day, the couple reconciled. Michael invited his wife and children to a soccer game. However, according to witnesses, Danielle appeared upset and was virtually non-communicative. That evening, the parents dropped their kids off at a friend's house for a sleepover and were left alone. Later, Danielle stopped by McDonald's and returned home around 10:30 p.m. Upon entering the house, she found her husband drunk. During dinner, Danielle received a message from an unknown man. Michael saw it, bit off a piece of his hamburger, and spit it at his wife. He then attacked her, attempting to strangle her. In self-defense, Danielle grabbed the first thing she could, a knife, and stabbed him in the chest. He fell and began to bleed profusely. According to the defendant, she immediately called emergency services, but mistakenly dialed the wrong number. Her actions were later corroborated during the investigation. In a state of shock, she lay down next to Michael and fell asleep until morning. At least, that's how Danielle explained the 11 hours of inactivity. When asked by the prosecution why she lied during the emergency call and subsequent questioning, Mrs. Redlick explained that she was afraid. She was concerned that no one would believe she had acted in self-defense. There were reasons for this fear. Shortly before the incident, she had been involved in a scuffle with friends. When police arrived at the scene, she resisted, attempting to bite one of them. She also refused to cooperate with the investigation, leading to charges of disorderly conduct and resisting arrest. Danielle had been on probation for about a year. It was also established that the cuts on her wrists were self-inflicted. She claimed she had tried to end her life due to the emotional turmoil, but the nature of the injuries suggested otherwise. They were superficial and not life-threatening. Therefore, her claims were not believed. Investigators also discovered that Danielle was far from a role model. After learning of Michael's infidelities, she signed up on a dating site where she interacted with men and retaliated by being unfaithful. Her profile status declared that she was single and not in a relationship. Analysis of countless messages between Michael and Danielle showed that she still loved her husband.
Once she learned of his affairs, she felt betrayed and disillusioned. She also found out that Michael planned to leave her, despite appearing repentant and desiring to mend their relationship. Danielle explained that it was hard for her to understand and accept her husband's actions. She was heartbroken that she had dedicated the best years of her life to a man who did not appreciate her. The prosecution used this information against her. The prosecutor argued that the crime was premeditated in a fit of rage because she could not forgive his infidelity and the impending divorce. Like Mr. Redlick, she was also prone to fits of anger, confirmed by their neighbors who noted that the couple often argued loudly, escalating into physical altercations. However, Michael and Danielle were described differently by those who knew them. Michael was portrayed positively as kind and helpful, while Danielle was seen as quarrelsome. Video evidence was presented showing the defendant acting irrationally and attacking her husband. Friends and Michael's brother agreed with this portrayal. One of them recalled calling her crazy, but assured that all would be well as long as steak knives were hidden. Danielle's lawyer argued that her actions were dictated by self-defense and the history of emotional and physical abuse. Relatives, often witnesses to their arguments, confirmed that Michael was rough and emotionally abusive. They also knew he frequently physically abused and humiliated her, although he never did so in their presence. Some family members reported that Danielle was nervous and quick-tempered, which only emerged after years of marriage. The prosecution clung to the fact that she effectively left her husband to die, which indicated she was waiting it out. They proved that her account logged into a dating app the night of the incident, suggesting premeditation driven by hatred and resentment, possibly even for financial gain. Following the divorce, Danielle stood to lose a portion of their accumulated wealth. At the time of Michael's death, her net worth was estimated at $1.2 million. It was also brought up that she had repeatedly changed her statements, seemingly trying to confuse the investigation and possibly tampered with evidence. However, The defense maintained that Mr. Redlick was a manipulator and predator. After his first wife's death, he pursued his stepdaughter relentlessly and molded a young woman to suit his needs. During the investigation, the prosecution offered the defendants a plea deal to admit to manslaughter, which would have resulted in only 10 years of imprisonment. However, she declined, despite the fact that if found guilty of first or second-degree murder, she faced a life sentence. She continued to insist on her innocence. The outcome of the trial was surprising to everyone. On July 17, 2022, the jury delivered their verdict. They found Danielle Redlick not guilty of premeditated murder, as they believed her actions were indeed in self-defense. However, they found her guilty of tampering with evidence, for which she received a 5-year suspended sentence. Having already served 3 years, these were credited to her. On August 5, 2022, the day the sentence was announced, the defendant was released in the courtroom. What do you think? Was the verdict fair? Or were the jurors cleverly misled into believing that Danielle's taking Michael's life was calculated and cold-blooded? Before starting the story, I want to apologize for my bad English. I am not a native speaker. However, I am trying my best for you guys. Thanks for your understanding. It's pretty exciting to admit to your parents the decision to play your own wedding. Tina Thomas was a lot more nervous than her fiancé, Gabe Watson. Tina was 26 years old at the time, just like her future husband, and this was her third serious relationship and second attempt at a wedding. Her first attempt to build a family with boyfriend Scott McCulloch ended in failure. No, the relationship between young people were just fine, but only Tina's mother was against this wedding, and Scott himself she did not like. There were no specific claims, but like every mother, she wanted a better and happier life for her daughter, and Tina herself, at that moment, was still very young. For this reason, the couple soon parted. The mirage of a joint future melted away. The second attempt, with Stan Marks, also failed. Here, Tina's parents did not play any role. The couple could not overcome the first 3-year crisis, and they parted by mutual consent. Finally, on Christmas Eve, at a party of friends, Tina meets Gabe Watson. We can't say it was love at first sight, on the contrary. The relationship was built more as mutual support for each other after a recent breakup. Yes, perhaps this is not the most joyful reason to start building a new relationship, but 2 years later, Gabe proposed marriage to Tina. Tina, having learned from bitter experience, said she agreed, but couldn't do it without parental blessing. In 2003, Gabe decided, like a real prince, beautifully and romantically appealed to the parents of his chosen one and chose Valentine's Day. But Tina's father was away, so the dinner was moved to the next day. On February 15th, during the dinner, when Watson voiced his decision to live with Tina all his life hand in hand, the father of the bride asked a seemingly simple question to the groom. "Does he love Tina?" Gabe stammered like a schoolboy but never answered. His father considered this reaction to be a common embarrassment among strangers. Then he asked his daughter the same question. Surprisingly, Tina did not answer this question directly either, but began her speech by saying that she was afraid of being alone at the age of 26. The father thought for a while and blessed the young ones. Preparing for a wedding takes a lot of time and effort, and while Tina was thinking about her outfit, her guests, and the whole wedding, Gabe was only planning the honeymoon. He didn't care at all how his future wife wanted to spend her vacation. He had already decided everything for her. His plan was to go to the Great Barrier Reef, which is located in the Pacific Ocean near Australia, and go diving there. First of all, to look at the sunken ship, the Townsville Titanic, which sank back in 1911. The problem was that Tina, unlike Gabe, wasn't into diving. Yes, he took her scuba diving in the pool sometimes, in calm water under the supervision of lifeguards, but no more than that. Gabe, himself, was an experienced scuba diver. He was completing a rescue diving course and had over 50 dives to his credit at the time, and of course it wasn't in a pool. If you don't learn to dive by our honeymoon, I'm warning you right away. You're staying home, walking the dog, or pruning roses in the garden. You're not going anywhere with me, said Gabe. Tina had no choice. In fact, Gabe even took out a loan to buy her own equipment and pay for her fiancé's classes. The first instructor Tina had taken lessons with was disappointed in her skills and even warned Gabe that his fiancée had absolutely no skills for open ocean swimming. A furious Gabe wouldn't listen to the diving instructor, accusing him of being the one who couldn't explain and refused to continue the class. The second instructor rather quickly gave Tina a credit, although then, and noted that Tina does everything from under the stick, solely to please her future husband. On October 11th, the young couple finally got married, and after 2 days, Tina and Gabe flew to Australia, spending on a trip of $10,000 which gave them for the wedding. It should be noted that Gabe devoted part of the honeymoon to Tina. They walked around Sydney, visited the Sydney Aquarium and the zoo. Tina was excited, but the closer they got to going to the Great Barrier Reef, the sadder she became. On the morning of October 21st, they flew to Townsville, and in the evening boarded a boat to one of the most beautiful places on Earth and every diver's dream. After a while, employees of the diving company will tell that in fact, the couple did not look like experienced divers, and even Gabe, who had graduated from courses and had experience behind him, could hardly understand the equipment, as if he saw it for the first time in his life. But nevertheless, it was he who helped Tina to pass the exam before diving, although such a test should be conducted separately, and when the instructor offered Tina his help underwater, she refused. It was also noted in the dive log that there was a strong current that day, and this moment in history should not be missed or glossed over. Gabe, as I said, helped his wife sort out the equipment they had bought back in the US and went to get the tanks they had to rent. Gabe took an 11-liter tank for himself and gave his wife an 8.5-liter tank, which for this place was an extremely small volume or even dangerous, given Tina's experience, or rather lack thereof. It was not possible to descend to the Townsville Titanic from the first time. Tina asked for additional cargo because she could not dive to depth, and Gabe at first did not work underwater computer, which calculates the necessary speed of diving and ascent, as well as shows the amount of oxygen in the cylinders. After returning to the boat, the computer worked and they tried again. The wreck was 49 feet deep, and Tina was the first to submerge, Gabe swimming behind her. From Gabe's statement, "At first everything was fine. At some point Tina stopped, started waving at me, and later signaled that she wanted to go up. I realized right away that she was just panicking. She used to do that. By this time we were halfway up, so I decided to calm her down and stay with her at the same depth for a while, without further diving, so that she could psychologically get used to the pressure. She continued to breathe very deeply, which was unsafe, and that's when I noticed she was sinking. I tried to grab her belt to hold her down, but she swung her arms so hard that she knocked the mask off my face. While I was putting the mask back on my face, though it didn't take long, Tina was already too far away from me. For a while I tried to swim to her, but I was unsuccessful. Then I decided to return to the surface to ask for help from the lifeguards. On the way, I met another swimmer with a narrow-set eye, but he paid no attention to my signs for help. Yes, there were 2 Asian men with them at depth, but neither of them confirmed Gabe's words about his request for help. Later, when the police took underwater computer readings, they confirmed that Gabe did try to swim after his drowning wife for a while, but eventually gave up the attempt very quickly. Although the ascent to the surface itself was not an emergency, on the contrary, Gabe surfaced as instructed, stopping at each required depth level. As for the other divers, each of them, when questioned by police, claimed that Gabe could have saved his wife, but he simply did not. In addition, this tragic incident occurred at the very beginning of their dive, and therefore Gabe had enough oxygen in his tanks to swim to the bottom and return back to the surface. The rescuers on duty on the ship, as soon as they realized what had happened, immediately went in search of Tina and found her very quickly. But unfortunately, it was too late. Tina was lying on her back, with her eyes open under her mask, at a depth of 82 feet. Her body was immediately lifted up, and on the deck of the yacht, they gave her artificial respiration for about 40 minutes. But to no avail, Tina died. Gabe all this time did not come close to his wife, but only stood somewhere aside, and according to witnesses, naively sniffed his nose. The same employees of the company said that the young man on the way to the shore and smiled and even played cards with other passengers. Gabe denied this in court. The subsequent autopsy of Tina showed that not everything was so clear.
Yes, there are no signs of obvious violent death, but there are bruises on the neck. There are traces of blood in the nostrils, which is also common at the 82-foot depth where Tina's body was found. There are no traces of alcohol in the blood, but there are high levels of drugs such as ibuprofen and paracetamol, although these drugs are used in the treatment of seasickness. A small amount of fluid was seen in the lungs. The report stated that Tina died from drowning, but it is possible that she drowned while already deprived of oxygen. Tina's gear was checked by the Australian Water Police, but no malfunctions were noted. The police could have written it off as an accident. An inexperienced diver ignored safety rules and paid for it with his life. A very common case, unfortunately. But only there were suspicious moments in this story, such as rather ambiguous results of the autopsy. Also, according to the diving team, strange behavior of Watson, which does not fit into the conventional picture, where the husband grieves for his wife who just died. All these factors did not give so easily close the case. And that's why the investigation was taking quite a long time. Gabe realized the detectives were digging for him. In addition, Tina's parents did not want to accept what had happened as a tragic accident and wanted to see their son-in-law in the dock. If not as the murderer of their daughter, then at least as a man who had not helped her. During the first interrogation, the police noted that the suspect was in shock, crying and laughing, twitching nervously, asking to call his father, who complained of pain in his ears, and begging him to tell his wife's parents about the tragedy. Late at night, Gabe was released. He went to the yacht that belonged to the company that sent them to the reef and asked them for a night's lodging, arguing that the trip was supposed to last 2 days, but because his wife had died, they had only been there for 24 hours. He also asked for a refund of half of the cost of their dive. In fact, he never got to see the sunken ship. On October 24th, Gabe's mother flies to Townsville to support her son and help him find a lawyer. That same day, at Gabe's request, they go to the morgue. Gabe wanted to see his wife one more time. Because the husband was still considered a suspect, the morgue employee called the detective who was in charge of the case. In theory, Gabe could have hidden some evidence, but the grief-stricken husband only cried, held his wife's cold hand, and begged her forgiveness, not realizing at all that the police officer was standing outside the door at the time, recording him on a tape recorder. "I didn't mean to hurt you." These are the words Detective Lawrence later uses against Gabe in court. Then at the morgue, "You told Tina you didn't mean to hurt her. What did you mean by that?" Lawrence will ask his question. The story of Gabe's sore ear was repeated again as he was traveling home with his wife's body. During a layover in Oakland, he sought medical attention on the airport grounds and was held there for evaluation. According to the investigation, this was done on purpose to avoid seeing Tina's father. However, and divers will confirm this, ear problems are a fairly common ailment among divers. Tina's funeral was held on November 5th, where Gabe still had to meet with the deceased's father. Gabe, almost in full view of everyone, took off his wife's wedding ring, putting it on his ring finger over hers, as well as earrings, which he immediately handed over to his father-in-law. Watson and the Thomas family never crossed paths again that day. Later in the trial, Gabe would be asked the question, "Did you really take your wife's jewelry off during the funeral?" Gabe will only smile and shrug. "I don't think I could have done it later." Everyone had different opinions about Gabe. Some said that this chubby, funny man was quite a kind man, and some, on the contrary, called him a tyrant and a despot. But they all agreed on one thing. Gabe and Tina were not happy, or at least they didn't seem to be. Tina's friends confirmed what she'd told her father at a family dinner on February 15th. Her union with Gabe was just a way to avoid dying alone, and that fear had led Tina to die on the seabed. Also, the victim, who died shortly before their honeymoon, confessed to a friend that her husband dragged her by the hand to an insurance company where he forced her to insure his life at a higher interest rate in case of death, and put his name in the column beneficiary. This testimony was checked through the insurance agent, and he confirmed everything. The cab driver who drove the newlyweds to the yacht was also questioned. Tina cried the whole way, but her husband paid no attention to her. Finally, Tina's friend Amanda Phillips told another story, and it became clear what the couple's relationship was really like. This damn jerk videotaped Tina urinating in the bathroom and then edited it and put it in a tape of them celebrating Christmas. That would have been okay, but he turned it on at a general viewing with a full house of guests. He laughed like a horse, while everyone twiddled their fingers around their temples and tried to explain to him that it was a very low act. I was clutching crosses on my fingers so Tina wouldn't get the idea to marry him. While removing jewelry right during a funeral may seem like a frightening and denunciatory act on Gabe's part, during the trial, in 2008, the jury was shown an extremely disturbing footage of Watson visiting Tina's grave, taking all the flowers from it and carrying them away. They were later found in a nearby trash can. Tina's father noticed the missing flowers, and to find out the thief, he set up a hidden camera in the next row among the monuments, but he never expected to see Gabe on the tape and was outraged by such an act. In court, Gabe's defense was that he and his wife had discussed the death of one of their own on an extreme honeymoon, and the lack of flowers on the grave was her request, which sounded very strange and unlikely. There's no telling how long the search for evidence would have dragged on if the cops had put on the exact same gear the newlyweds had and hadn't tried to stage that incident. Gabe said Tina drowned while he was trying to put a mask on her face. It turned out it was impossible to put the mask on underwater by yourself unless you used another source of air, in this case, Tina's oxygen. In late November 2008, the Australian police arrested Gabe, and on June 5, 2009, Gabe's trial began, where he pleaded guilty, but only to failing to save his wife, so he was charged with negligent homicide and sent to prison for 18 months. After completing his sentence, Gabe returned home to the U.S., but a year later, the now U.S. court charged him with first-degree murder, the motive for which was to receive insurance payments after the death of his wife. Gabe's lawyer tried to defend his client, shifting all the blame on the diving company, that the employees of this company did not take care of the safety of tourists, and now, afraid of losing their license, and therefore the whole business, are trying to shift the blame on the unhappy husband who has already served his time in another country. As for the money received from the insurance company, the payout amounted to $33,000, while Gabe spent much more money on lawyers and additional expertise. Nevertheless, the prosecution continued to insist that this spending was only because the husband could not assume that he would not be believed, and also the prosecutor refused to accept the fact that Gabe, with a degree in drowning rescue in hand, could not even save his wife. When Gabe had his say, he addressed the jury. "It's been 7 years since the tragedy, and there hasn't been a day that I haven't thought about that terrible day. The public has pounced on me, blaming me for my wife's death, calling me a murderer. There wasn't a single person who looked me in the eye and said, 'Yes, I understand how bad you feel, but it's not your fault.' On the contrary, everyone just wants me dead. And here I can only understand my late wife's parents. Yes, they will never forgive me, no matter how much I kneel before them, and no matter how much I beg their forgiveness. You often hear the phrase, 'I can't imagine what it's like to lose a child,' but I've never heard anyone say, 'I can't imagine what it's like to lose a wife, especially on a honeymoon.' If I can be accused of anything, it's that I didn't make enough effort to save Tina. But I've already received my punishment for that. Perhaps you all would have been satisfied if I had drowned with my wife then, 7 years ago. But I was afraid to die, afraid I wouldn't be able to rise from the bottom to the top. I just wanted to live, as I still want to live now." No evidence of Gabe's guilt was presented to the court. The jury found Gabe not guilty. What do you guys think? Is Gabe guilty of Tina's death?
In 2012, the family of one of the richest people in Brazil, businessman Marcos Matsunaga, became the center of attention after Marcos disappeared on the eve of a major billion-dollar deal. The case shocked the whole country, and photos of the inconsolable widow of the millionaire did not leave the front pages of the leading national publications. Initially, as the main version, the police considered the intrigues of competitors who could kidnap and get rid of the businessman in order to disrupt the upcoming deal. However, the revealed truth turned out to be much more cruel and terrible. The story of a cold-blooded murder and a monstrous attempt to cover up the crime formed the basis of several documentaries. Who is Marcos Matsunaga? Entrepreneur Marcos Matsunaga was one of the richest people in Brazil and ran a family business producing various food products, Yoki. The company was founded by Marcos's grandfather, who had once emigrated across the ocean. His name was Yoshizo Kitano, actually, from the first letters of the surname and first name of the founder, and the name of the brand was formed. The foundation of the future business empire was laid in the middle of the last century. It is noteworthy that it all started with a small flour milling enterprise, which managed not only to survive, but also thrive during the years of crisis and war, and then transformed into a huge company with a worldwide reputation and the widest range of products. Marcos was born into a wealthy family, and from an early age he knew no denial of anything. He did not have to build and develop his business from scratch, because he inherited everything that his grandfather and father had created, becoming the CEO of the family food company. He had every chance to become the first billionaire in his family, and he strived for this almost all his conscious life, but such grandiose plans were not destined to materialize. Everyone who was personally acquainted with Marcos characterized him as a good and quite talented businessman, who managed not only to save, but also to multiply the family capital, several times increasing profits. But he was not an easy man. Capricious, arrogant, with a heavy character, and a constant desire to control everyone who was near him. In addition, the businessman was far from handsome in appearance. He suffered from childhood overweight, had problems with vision, because of which he wore glasses, and he was also short in stature and somewhat clumsy. All this from an early age created a lot of problems for the boy when communicating with his peers. He had almost no friends and female representatives of the female sex, and it all shunned this strange and peculiar guy. Marcos, for a long time, all failed to build a long and serious relationship with anyone, because beyond a couple of dates, it did not go. Even his own business and multi-million-dollar inheritance did not make him an enviable and desirable bachelor. He repulsed women with his arrogance and egoism, so Marcos often used the services of escorts and representatives of the ancient profession. There is practically no information about the entrepreneur's first wife in open sources. It is only known that he did not marry out of great love or passion, but rather out of desperation and at the insistence of his relatives. Despite this, the marriage lasted several years, although both spouses almost immediately began to regret their decision to start a family. At first, the young wife tried to put up with the complex character of the businessman, hoping that in time they will manage to become a happy couple where both support and understand each other. But the young woman was wrong, and over the years they only increasingly distanced from each other. Also, Marcos constantly cheated on her and did not even try to hide it or somehow justify it. And he looked for mistresses mainly on websites where girls offered intimacy for money. Alice was one of those girls. She was an escort, and her portfolio was available on the relevant platforms. It was there that the businessman noticed a bright, attractive blonde with a beautiful figure and began to regularly invite her on dates, generously paying for them. Alice was 6 years younger than him. She was born and raised in a very poor and dysfunctional family living in one of the most crime-ridden areas of the city. Alice didn't know her own father. Her mother was a heavy drinker, and she was involved with men who shared her addiction. The girl had a hard and joyless childhood. At a very young age, she was repeatedly beaten, harassed, and abused by her mother's roommates. Barely finished school, Alice literally ran away from home and forever left the neighborhood in which she grew up. The girl took nursing courses, after which she got a job at a hospice. However, she soon realized that caring for dying patients is far from the limit of her dreams and abilities. In addition, sensitive and vulnerable young woman quickly became attached to people, and the death of each patient perceived as a personal tragedy. A few years later, Alice decided to get a higher education and completely change her occupation. Her choice fell on the law, which she considered a promising occupation, opening in life almost all the doors. She had long been preparing for admission, and was able to score the required number of points in the entrance exams, but to pay for her studies from her modest salary as a nurse, she could not. Alice had no one to help her, because she had severed all ties with her relatives after she left home. Then, young, pretty Alice, with a slender figure, decided to earn on her external data and registered on a site specializing in the provision of escort services. There she was helped to create a bright personal page, and soon wealthy men themselves began to show interest in the young blonde beauty. Escorting and providing intimate services brought Alice a good income, allowing her to pay for her studies and fully support herself. But she planned to leave this specific occupation as soon as she got her diploma and got a job in her specialty. During this period, Alice met Marcos, who became one of her regular customers. He was generous with gifts and met regularly with Alice without hiding from anyone. She knew that the businessman was married, but at the time she couldn't have dreamed that one of the richest men in the country would leave his wife for her. The story of Alice Matsunaga was like a Cinderella tale. A poor girl from a disadvantaged family, engaged in providing escort services, meets a multimillionaire who soon falls madly in love with her. Marcos really literally lost his head, but now it is impossible to say for sure whether Alice herself made efforts to do so. After about 6 months, Marcos realized that he wanted not just to date his new young mistress, but to be with her permanently. He, without a second thought and regret, filed for divorce from his first wife and began to present everyone Alice as his fiancée. For obvious reasons, the businessman did not want anyone to know about how he met his chosen one and what she earned a living. Therefore, the couple came up with a quite ordinary story of a casual acquaintance in a cafe and adhered to this version. Even the closest relatives and few friends of Marcos did not guess anything. However, Alice in the family Matsunaga received not too welcome. The parents of the entrepreneur guessed that this attractive young person put into action all her charm to fall in love with the rich but ugly Marcos. And now she was going to great lengths to pretend that she did not notice his hard character. Nevertheless, when Marcos announced his intention to divorce his first wife and marry Alice, no one strongly objected. The businessman arranged a lavish wedding in the traditional style, with a white dress, a large number of guests, and a huge tiered cake. After that, he moved his wife to his huge and luxurious mansion, where she became a full-fledged mistress. Matsunagi had long been known as an avid collector of expensive wines and rare weapons. For wines in his house was built a huge cellar, where the bottles were carefully sorted by year and country. And for weapons, the house had a secret room, on the walls of which from floor to ceiling flaunted firearms and edged weapons. Marcos was very proud of his collections and was constantly engaged in their replenishment. However, in addition, his house was literally full of antiques, luxury goods, and modern art, which tastelessly hung on the walls and stood literally on all surfaces. Soon after the wedding, the couple decided that they were ready to have an heir, but despite all their efforts, Alice for a long time did not get pregnant naturally. Then the couple decided to resort to the procedure of in vitro fertilization, but even here success awaited them far from immediately. When their common daughter was born, it seemed that the happiness of the couple now has no limits. The young parents were engaged in the education of the long-awaited baby girl, made plans for the future, and when the girl grew up a little, the whole family began to travel the world, getting acquainted with different cultures and traditions. Their daughter was a real little princess, who was brought up in love, care, and luxury. But the couple had one very specific common hobby: hunting large animals. Although it would be more correct to say that it was always a hobby of Marcos, who at different times tried to join it to his chosen women and his first wife. But most women did not just dislike this activity, it frankly repulsed them. The businessman no longer hoped that he would meet someone who would share his passion. Now many believe that Alice became interested in hunting to win even more favor Marcos and conquer his heart. At first, they visited shooting ranges together, where Alice learned how to handle different types of firearms, and afterward they went into the woods together to hunt wild animals. Alice felt no pity when she took the lives of animals and treated it as a kind of competition. Either you do it or you don't. Marcos liked this approach, and he liked to watch his wife handle her weapons and stalk her prey. He also taught her how to skin and carve wild boars, deer, and other forest creatures. Together they skinned them and separated body parts, using large knives, special cleavers, and axes. In addition, the family did not have cats or dogs as pets, but poisonous snakes for which special terrariums were built, with conditions as close as possible to their natural habitat. It was the realization of another long-time dream of Marcos, who adored snakes, but his first wife did not approve of the idea of having a home terrarium. Alice had really bought Marcos off by sharing his rather strange hobbies. In the spring of 2012, the entrepreneur was preparing to make perhaps the main deal of his life and career, which would make him a billionaire and take his income to a whole new level. He was actively negotiating with several business partners, going to sell the family company, and the proceeds of the huge sum of money to invest in a new profitable business. At home at this time, Matsunaga rarely appeared because he was completely absorbed in work and the realization of his grandiose plans. He and his wife moved into an elite apartment complex located in the business center of the city, not far from the main office of the businessman's company. Marcos was away almost all the time, while his young wife was bored alone in a luxurious apartment with a panoramic view of the city. The businessman's work schedule was scheduled literally by the minute. He was lost in meetings, business meetings, and consultations with specialists. Often he did not even spend the night at home, but promised his wife that as soon as the deal was done, their lives would be completely changed and transformed. On May 19, 2012, on the eve of the deal for $1 billion, the entrepreneur disappeared without a trace. His wife reported the incident only the next day because she believed that Marcos at work. According to Alice, in the evening he was scheduled a meeting, which could last into the night, and early in the morning, her husband was to meet with a business partner, so he took some things, warned that, most likely to spend the night in the office, and then go straight to the deal. When the next day Marcos did not return home and stopped answering his phone, Alice became concerned and reported him missing. The police immediately found out that the entrepreneur did not show up for a meeting in the evening or an important meeting in the morning, which he simply could not miss. In this regard, there was immediately a version that the millionaire was kidnapped, and most likely, his family in the coming hours will receive ransom demands. But 24 hours passed. Then the second, no ransom demands were received, and hopes that Matsunaga was still alive were literally melting before our eyes.
Investigators at this time did not sit idle and began to question relatives, friends, and business partners of the businessman, trying to find out whether he had enemies and who could be beneficial to his disappearance or the disruption of the upcoming deal. However, despite all efforts, it was not possible to find a specific person or people who might have wished the death of the businessman. He ran his business competently, was able to prioritize and plan his steps ahead so that his strategic decisions made almost everyone always benefited. A few days later, after taking her little daughter, Alice came to the home of her father-in-law and mother-in-law to tell what she had not dared to tell the police. The young woman with tears in her eyes said that her husband has long been cheating on her with a girl named Natasha Villarreal Lima and did not hide it. True, after several major quarrels and threats to divorce, Marcos promised that he would leave the mistress for the sake of preserving the family. In fact, the man did not stop meeting with Natasha, but began to do it more carefully, so as not to provoke another family scandals. The wife guessed everything and decided to hire a private detective to gather evidence of the businessman's infidelity. Alice had photographs and videos of her husband on romantic dates with the same Natasha. It was noteworthy that he took his new girlfriend to the same restaurants and entertainment venues that he and his wife frequented and where everyone knew him. Marcos seemed to demonstrate to others how much he disdained his wife and can openly cheat on her without hiding from anyone. As it later turned out, Natasha Lima businessman found on the same site escort services where he once met Alice. They met for about 5 months, and during that time he gave her an expensive car and also paid a large sum of money for Natasha to remove her profile from the site. The available photos and videos proving her husband's cheating, the daughter-in-law presented to Marcos's parents. She also added that she had shown all this to Marcos the day before his disappearance, but instead of making excuses and asking for forgiveness, he simply packed his things, told his wife that he was leaving her, and then left their apartment and disappeared without a trace. Based on Alice's story, her husband, giving in to passion, simply decided to run away with a new mistress. But everyone who knew Matsunaga unanimously asserted that he could not just leave the business and disappear because he was too serious about the business, which for decades built his family. Answers to many questions were found about a week later, when in a deserted area, Half a 100 kilometers from the house of the businessman, a passerby found scattered garbage bags, inside which were the remains of a human body. The man immediately reported the gruesome discovery to the police, and it soon became clear that the victim was Marcus Matsunaga, who was searched for all over the country. Experts determined that the businessman was killed by a shot to the head, after which his body was dismembered, packed into garbage bags, and taken to the outskirts of the city. It was noteworthy that the murderer, according to the pathologists, was either a surgeon or an experienced butcher who was proficient with a carving knife. Such a conclusion was inevitable, based on how accurately and professionally the cuts were made in the right places to separate the body parts from each other. At the first stage of the investigation did not have any concrete leads, so it was decided to start the investigation from the place where the deceased man was last seen alive. Elite residential complex where Marcos lived with his wife and daughter was equipped with numerous video surveillance cameras, the records of which began to be scrutinized. It turned out that the evening before the disappearance, the couple ordered food delivery home. On the recordings of the camera in the elevator was seen as Marcos goes down to the first floor and then comes back with boxes of pizza in his hands. He enters his apartment and never leaves it again, not that evening, not at night, and not the next day. Matsunaga seems to disappear into his own home, but in the morning his wife leaves the apartment with 3 large wheeled suitcases. The footage shows that the suitcases are very heavy, and she moves them with great difficulty. The investigators had already guessed what kind of luggage it was. On the same day, the businessman's widow was taken into custody and brought to the police station to testify. At first, she tried to deny everything and stuck to the initial version that her husband had left her for a mistress. But when she was shown the elevator footage, she burst into tears and started talking. According to Alice, their family life has long since broken down, and from the former idyll is not left a trace. Her husband humiliated her, constantly reproached her with the work in the escort, saying that he pulled her out of the mud and also stated that she was a bad mother for their daughter. He also tried to control literally every move his wife made, not allowing her to make friends. When Alice once raised the topic of divorce, Marcos laughed and replied that he would leave her with nothing, take the child, and forbid her to see him. Alice said that on that fateful evening she showed her husband received from the detective pictures, which were captured Marcos with his mistress, but he only made him angry. He slapped his wife, and then, according to her, everything was as if in a fog. Alice does not remember how she got a gun in her hands, from which she shot her husband, and later, realizing what had happened, she decided to dispose of the body, making it look as if he disappeared without a trace. Alice had experience as a nurse and was familiar with human anatomy, and her husband had taught her how to skin and cut up animal carcasses, for which they had the necessary tools at home. All that followed was a matter of technique. While Alice was cutting up and bagging her husband's body, their young daughter was sleeping peacefully in the next room. From the beginning, Alice's testimony raised many doubts and questions. In addition, it soon became clear that the very pictures and videos proving Marcos's cheating, his wife received from the hands of a private detective only on May 20th, that is, after she had killed her husband. Then, as I said, Alice took these photos and videos to the parents of the businessman, saying that Marcos had abandoned her by running away with his mistress. We also managed to find Natasha Lima, who appeared in court as a witness. According to her, Marcos himself wanted a divorce, but frankly afraid of his wife, saying that she was mentally unstable and capable of terrible things. The last time Natasha saw her lover the day before his disappearance, he complained about the constant scandals in the family and said that after the sale of the company is going to move to live in Florida, where he plans to establish a new company. Taking Alice with him was not part of his plans. He was going to divorce her and forget her like a terrible dream. Another terrible discovery was the discovery by experts of blood in the lungs of the dead man, which indicated that Marcos was still alive and trying to breathe when his wife separated his head from the body. This is wild and horrifying. Alice herself vehemently denied this, insisting that he died instantly from a bullet. The pathologist also found that the same bullet entered Marcos's head at a rather odd angle,
as if he was sitting or lying down, not expecting to be shot. So he didn't even try to defend himself or dodge. This contradicted Alice's account of her husband attacking her and her trying to defend herself. On top of that, almost all the witnesses who testified at the trial denied that Matsunaga could have hit his wife. Yes, he had a difficult character, could say various hurtful words, but in life never raised a hand on anyone. Everything looked as if Alice herself made up this episode, because Marcos could not refute anything. As a result, the court found Alice guilty of premeditated murder with particular cruelty and attempting to conceal the crime. Alice Matsunaga was sentenced to 20 years in prison, which many considered an extremely lenient punishment for such a crime. The parents of the deceased man are now responsible for the upbringing of their daughter.